the CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you're serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
Listen, it's getting closer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. All right, well, welcome back, everyone, to episode 10 of the CoCo Crew Podcast. I am John Linville.
And Neil Blanchard.
And we're here with Neil Blanchard, and we are the CoCo Crew. We are now approximately 1 month away from CoCo Fest. Hard to believe that we're already getting this far along. This is episode 10. It's really our 11th episode since we started from zero, like good C programmers. And coming up on what we're starting to call our CoCo New Year, aka CoCo Fest. So I'm excited. How about you, Neil?
I'm definitely excited, but also nervous at the same time because I'm trying to get some last-minute projects done before the fest. So it's not that I don't want the fest here. It's just that it's coming too quick now.
Yeah, it's just funny. You know, you wait and you wait and wait, and then it's coming too quickly. You could say you could use another couple of weeks, right? I figured you were nervous because of our road trip, and you don't think I'm a good driver. But I assure you I'm an excellent driver. Every Sunday on the driveway, that lets me back up in the car. Anyway, so you mentioned projects. You've got some projects underway. Is there? I know time is sometimes cruel master. It sounded like maybe you've had some projects that may or may not materialize. You've got some others in the works. You keeping those under wraps?
Yeah, I do have one under the works right now, but I don't want to mention anything in case it doesn't come through. I'm waiting on a whole pile of parts.
Cool. Well, that's understandable. Yeah, my new projects have kind of slowed down. I'm kind of trying to finish out, longer term, older projects. They're not really coding or anything at this point. They're closer to arts and crafts or production. Today I spent some time folding some nice die cut boxes for cartridges. You know, I've been producing artwork for stickers and for instruction cards. I have plastic cartridge cases in hand and just need to build some circuit boards and start putting some stuff together. So hopefully we'll have a nice collection of CoCo cartridges available for sale at CoCo Fest. I think that'll be pretty exciting. Hopefully there'll be enough this time.
Well, I have to say it looks pretty impressive. Those Farfall ones you got done looks very amazing.
Yeah, well, it's really just one, and even that one's. I'm going to try and use a different circuit board for no particular reason other than because I designed it. But yeah, the boxes are nice. I have custom boxes. They're the same basic design as the boxes from Tim Lindner that are reproductions of the old Radio Shack cartridge boxes, but he printed them up for me in my custom color, and I've got my logo on the back, and I had him not cut the big window in the front, so where I'm going to put, instead of having the cartridge manual showing through, I'm going to have a sticker on the front, and instead of a manual, I've only got a little card because that's the way I roll. Anyway, it was enough about that. We're just trying to introduce the show here. How about eBay? You doing anything fun or interesting on eBay lately?
I haven't done nothing on eBay. I'm always looking for odd candy items, but
yeah, eBay. Well, I mean, Kijiji and Craigslist, those count too. No CoCo stuff there.
no CoCo stuff.
Huh.
It's kind of dry over here, so
yeah, it was kind of a light month for me as well. Let's see, I did pick up a 16K RAM expansion for an MC10, mostly just a target of opportunity, and I also picked up an old book from the like 1979 from the People's Computer Company called "What Do You Do After You Hit Return?" And it's a book of computer games, some of which have basic source and some of which don't. It's just a weird little snapshot from the early days of home computing, talking about where people were trying to figure out what do you do with a computer at home. So I like little books like that, and I've got a few. It's pretty funny. Well, this is the book where it had the origins of Hunt the Wumpus, which is funny. It describes the game, but there's no source in the book. But you've probably seen Hunt the Wumpus on a number of old computers. I know Bob Swoger introduced my son to Hunt the Wumpus at a CoCo Fest, which is a lot more innocent than it sounds. But anyway, I did pick up one other thing that's kind of neat. I think it actually came from Brazil, and it's called a Cantronics PC-14. Cantronics is a company that does a lot of stuff in ham radio, and so what this is, it's a board with a ROM chip or EEPROM chip and a 6522 VIA, which is a chip that's kind of similar to the 6821 PIA that we talked about before because they're in the CoCo. But anyway, it's a board that's designed to interface a CoCo to a packet radio, what's called a terminal node controller. And so it's got some ham radio software built onto it, but I got it just because I thought it was neat that it hooked up to the 6522. Well, let's see. Actually, it says came from Somerville, Massachusetts, so I'm not sure where I got the Brazil part. I must have made that up. But
I had a friend back in the day who had that. He's a big ham radio user and also a CoCo user. And I remember he used to transfer packet data constantly with his CoCo. At the end of the CoCo's life, when he ventured into the PC world, he actually hung on to his CoCo 3 just for sending packet data.
Well, that's cool. It's fun to acquire a few CoCo items. Hope to acquire some more at CoCo Fest. I may transfer a few off to other people. We'll see what I can pack in the truck. Anyway, well, I guess that's a good way to get started. So let's go on and start the show. Okay? Sounds good to you? Good.
Let's do it.
All right. Okay, well, we're back. Let's have some announcements. We'll start with our standard set of announcements. We are the CoCo Crew. We are available on Twitter as at CoCo Crew Podcast. We're also available on Facebook. We have a group called the CoCo Crew Podcast. As many other podcasts, we are, of course, available on iTunes, and we are available for streaming through Stitcher. Still claiming to be available through Google Play. I don't know if they ever did get their podcasting up and running yet or not. Have you heard anything about Google Play podcasts yet, Neil?
That's been the question of the year.
Okay. Maybe we should actually look this stuff up, but that's how we roll sometimes. But anyway, we are a member of the Throwback Network, which, of course, is a list of retro-themed podcasts. It includes the CoCo Crew and some other technology-oriented retro podcasts, such as podcasts about the Intellivision or the Atari 800s, some other general retro computing podcasts, and then they've got some other stuff in there that is just stuff about the 80s and that sort of stuff. In addition, we are listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. This is a list of mostly technology, or I guess probably exclusively technology-oriented podcasts related to video games. And so it's broken down by platform. If you take a look at the link in the show notes, if you're looking for another podcast, it's a good place to start. If you want to send an email to the show, of course, you want to reach Neil and I together, we have several addresses set up, whichever one you prefer or can remember. We have show@cococrew.org, podcast@cococrew.org, and feedback@cococrew.org. And, of course, if you would prefer to contact either Neil or I directly, I am available as john@cococrew.org. That's JOHN. And Neil is available as Neil@cococrew.org. And again, that's NEIL. That pretty well covers our standard announcements. I'm going to take a moment here to introduce a new podcast. Many of us, are Radio Shack or TRS-80 fans in a broader sense than just a CoCo. And so there is a new podcast available called TRS-80 Trash Talk. And this is a podcast about, the other TRS-80s, or you might even say the real TRS-80s, the ones that actually have a Z80. And I don't know if they'll cover the pocket computer or not, but mostly they're going to cover at least all the other TRS-80s. This is the hosts are Peter Satinsky, Ian Maverick, and, of course, Randy Kindig. Randy is a prolific podcaster. He's a host of Floppy Days, and he appears on Retro Computing Roundtable. I'm not sure what else he's involved in. Again, if you're looking for another podcast, and if your taste just if your blood runs Radio Shack Silver, then check out TRS-80 Trash Talk, and I think you'll probably enjoy it.
Is this a new podcast?
Yeah, they're just on episode 1. I guess you haven't listened, huh?
No, I'm going to have to check this out. They're definitely not going to have a shortage of machines to cover. There's a lot of different models.
No, it's pretty cool. And part of their podcast, they're talking about which machines they're going to cover, and they actually mentioned that they're not going to cover the color computer. That there was already a podcast covering the CoCo, and how they weren't sure that their community had as much energy going in it as the CoCo guys. They have a lot of energy, so I thought that was pretty exciting to be referenced as a model for community participation. So good job, CoCo guys. Way to keep the spirit alive, huh? All right, well, moving on. Still going to do this set of announcements of upcoming events that you may want to visit. First up is the Vintage Computer Festival Southeast 4.0. I've mentioned it many times. I wasn't sure if they were using the 4.0 nomenclature or not. It looks like they are in some of the advertising I've seen now, so I'll use it as well. This is being held April 2nd and 3rd, and that's the weekend right after April Fool's Day, in Roswell, Georgia. I've been to a couple of these events, and it's usually a pretty good show. And I intend to be at this event at least for Saturday. So come down and see us. And come and enjoy the show. I think it'll be great. Okay, moving on to, previously we had mentioned that on April 9th there was a event called the Walsall Game Smart being held in the UK. The link to Walsall seems to have disappeared. I'm not sure what's happened to that event. If you are in the UK and you know what's happened to the Walsall Game Smart, please send us some feedback. So other than this, we're not really going to mention it in the announcements. So that's what happened to it. That's why it's disappeared. Moving on. Nobody corrected me on my pronunciation last time, so I'm going to see if I can hit it again. The Segundo Encontro Club Colorio. This is happening on April 9th, 2016 in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I really would like to go to this, but I just don't see it in my travel plans. Anyway, this is the equivalent to CoCo Fest happening in South America, specifically in Brazil. It looks like a good group of guys. They seem to have a lot of fun last year. I guess so because they're doing it again this year. There were a lot of CoCo clones in Brazil. Then There was a CP400, which is basically a clone. It's got some mechanical differences for the cartridge slot or whatever. Like I said, I wish I could get there, but don't think I'm going to make it. But if you are in Brazil or somewhere nearby, then I think you should consider getting there April 9th.
Or if you're taking a vacation around that time and you're in the area.
Exactly. Moving on, the Vintage Computer Festival East 11. That's XI. So the Super Bowl lost its Roman numerals, but the VCF East apparently has found it. That is happening on April 15th to 17th, 2016, and the 15th to 17th, that's 3 days. So this is a pretty good event. In the past, I've been to a couple of these events. They have a 3-day event. So on Friday, they have a collection of seminars or whatever, kind of in-depth sessions. So if you're a real uber geek on retro stuff, you can go and learn how to do retro bright, or learn how to fix CRT monitors, or learn how to realign floppy disk heads, or whatever it is they're talking about. But it's sort of at that level of thing. And then on Saturday and Sunday is more the notable dignitaries come and give mini lectures, or they usually have a show of floor where you can walk around and look at old computers. Anyway, that's in Wall, New Jersey. I highly recommend the event. So if you are in the northeastern part of the United States, I definitely think you should make it out there. Okay, well, moving on to the big event. This is the 25th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest. This is happening April 23rd and 24th of 2016 in Lombard, Illinois. This is our big event. This is what we have been trying to motivate all of our listeners to try to attend. It's a great event. You get to meet all the other crazy CoCo folks, participate in the no minimum bid auction, talk to the other folks on the mailing list that normally you'd only get to exchange a little email with, pick up new products. John Strong's got some new stuff coming. I've got some stuff. I'm sure Cloud9 will have some stuff, and probably some others. I just really can't say enough about the event. Do you want to try to add something to the?
It's excellent. I think you covered it, but it is the event to check out. If you're into the CoCo, even just a little bit, it's the place to be.
Yeah. And in fact, it's such a good event that the next item on our announcements doesn't show up for another 5 months. This is the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest 11. That's happening in September 10th and 11th in 2016, happening in
Elk Grove, Illinois.
Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Yeah, so it's kind of nearby. It's the same general area as CoCo Fest. Yeah, so you've been to this event, right, Neil?
I was there last year, yeah. Plan on trying to make it there this year as well.
Awesome. I think it's a bit of Commodore-oriented event. Most of the people involved, I think, are Commodore people. But as I understand it, they're welcome to retro computing and all persuasions. So
yeah, it was well rounded. I mean, there was actually a lot of TRX-80 stuff. Speaking of that new podcast.
Cool. Very exciting. All right. Well, I think that probably does it for our announcements. So we'll be back in just a bit with some news.
You are listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast with Neil Blanchard and John Linville. Like how I switched those names around? I'm the original gamer Stevie Stroh, and I'm a CoCo Nut. And if you're a CoCo Nut too, then visit I'mACoCoNut.com for all kinds of cool CoCo links, including my YouTube gaming videos. So visit I'mACoCoNut.com, and long live the CoCo. Back to you, Neil and John.
And now it's time for some news. So it's a funny thing. Neil and I are constantly trying to manage the size of the podcast. We really don't want to produce uber long podcasts. We want to kind of keep them, if not short, still sweet. And so in an attempt to manage the length of the podcast, we decided to do some recording on a shorter schedule, thinking that, well, maybe if we record in a shorter period of time, then there won't be quite as much news that'll have popped up. And maybe it's a sound plan, but damn it, you guys. You guys have pushed out so many news items that it's sometimes a bit overwhelming. So part of me is tempted to say, hey guys, slow down, save it for next month. But of course it's the best problem to have, right? Is for our community to be so engaged and so active that we just have tons of news to report on. So, I mean, every month it surprises me. How about you, Neil? You surprised to see all this activity?
I'm always surprised. I mean,
it's the same surprise month after month, but it's still a surprise.
And like you said, even in a shorter amount of time, there's still the same amount of projects. It's great.
Maybe even more. Okay, so let's move on with our first news item. It's not really an announcement so much as a question from John Metcalf on the Facebook Color Computer Group. Said, would anyone be interested in entering a color robot battle tournament? He says he's thinking of organizing one. He provides a link to a web page that describes Color Robot Battle. And if you're not familiar with it, Color Robot Battle is a kind of cool little programming game. There's a custom language there that it's pretty simple stuff where you have basically one-letter commands, like forward and back, left and right, and a certain amount of control statements to, if you see a robot in front of you, then shoot your weapon, that sort of thing. It has some similarities to Core Wars or some other kind of programming games in the past. It's a cool little language. I had entertained the possibility of maybe taking the Color Robot Battle tournament idea and turn it into an event at CoCo Fest. I don't think that's going to happen just because of being overwhelmed with other responsibilities, but it would be fun. Maybe we can do it next year. In the meantime, if you want to sharpen your Color Robot Battle skills, check out the link in the show notes and contact Mr. Metcalf and see what he can set up. What do you think, Neil? Do you want to write one?
I think it's a great idea, actually, because it gives a chance to somebody who doesn't really know how to program. It gives them an opportunity to get involved in something.
Yeah, but if nothing else, I guess you could, it comes with a couple of sample programs. I guess you could just pick one of those and say, well, this is my my program, and we'll see what happens. Okay, well, the next item is from Brett Gordon. This is Beretta. And Brett does a lot of neat little projects. Often they're system-oriented stuff like booting Nitrous 9 in various ways and that sort of thing. And so that's essentially what this is. He's got a video that he's posted on YouTube, and it seems to show him booting up Nitrous 9 on the CoCo 3 FPGA platform from the internal SD card, which I guess the internal SD card is it's not really emulating any existing CoCo hardware. It's just there, so he's using some other interface to get to it. And anyway, I'm sure his video can explain it better. But if you are interested in the CoCo 3 FPGA platform and efficient ways to use that and the resources there, you probably want to check out Brett's video and see if it's of use to you. All right, moving on. From Travis Popp, Poppe, might be Pope, I'm not sure. Anyway, Travis posted that he was thinking of producing an ultimate CoCo SDC image that can be put on an SD card and have all this stuff you want to use your CoCo. And it seems to be a popular idea. It's kind of popped up a couple of times before, and I guess actually Barry Nelson has sort of already done that. Although I think did his actually target? I think his was targeting DriveWire originally, so
it was.
And so now apparently he's taken up the challenge and converted his to run on CoCo SDC as well. If you want to find an easy way to make use of the archive of CoCo stuff that's out there in the world, at least to dip your feet in and start playing with stuff, there's images out there. And maybe if you have a different idea of ultimate, which I think was part of the discussion, is that not everybody agrees on what is the ultimate image. If you have your own view of it, maybe there's opportunity for you to create your ultimate. But maybe you need to have a different name then. You could have yours the spectacular CoCo SDC image, and someone could have the awesome CoCo SDC image. What do you think? All right, well, moving on, we have an announcement from Lee Patterson that he has got a Bouncy Ball public beta version available. This is the game that he has been writing for the CoCo, where you you have a kind of a bouncing figure that you have to navigate through a maze and collect or reclaim the Christmas trees that the snowmen have stolen or whatever. So I guess he's made that available. It says public beta, so there's bound to be a link in his blog here somewhere for where you can download it. I'm not really seeing it right now, but I'll bet it's in here. Anyway, there'll be a link to his announcement in the show notes. There's a video there. I'm sure there's a way to get the code.
That sounds an awful lot like Xmas Rush 2.
Well, he kind of linked them together, didn't he? But anyway, so I actually have been in contact with Lee offline or through, well, still online, I guess, through Facebook. And sounds like he has made his reservations for CoCo Fest. So I'm hoping to see him there.
That's great.
I hope that's not private information. If it is private, Lee, I apologize. But anyway, hoping to see Lee at the CoCo Fest. And that'll be our victory. We'll get one extra person to come to CoCo Fest, and that'll be hopefully it'll be a lot more than one, but at least we should have one. So that's a win, don't you think, Neil?
That's right.
So looking good. So the next one, wasn't quite sure what to make of this. There's not a lot of detail, but it's from our friend Hugo Defort, who's done some programming stuff on the CoCo. I think Hugo is a Quebecois, living in Quebec. So he has an interest in international fonts, I guess, and so that's played out here where he's created a multilingual Latin 1-based font. So basically, for all the Roman style languages, including English and German and French and whatever, hopefully his font can express any of that on the CoCo. And so I'm not sure what he's up to, but he's got some examples of using it in different graphical resolutions and how much actual character display you can get with it or whatever. So he hints that he's using it for some kind of project, but doesn't quite say what the project is. So I don't know. That's probably a wait and see. But it looks pretty good. Did you see the fonts, Neil?
No, I haven't checked it out, but it definitely sounds like it's going to be for part 2 on that one.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be announcing something later on that one. The next item, there was a discussion almost a month ago now, but on the mailing list about the GoTech floppy emulator. I don't know if you've seen these.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically a little box. It's it's about the shape of a 3.5-inch floppy drive, but it's got a USB port on the front, and the notion is that you load it. You put diskette images on your USB thumb drive and plug it into this, and then it emulates the floppy drive to the computer plugged in the other end. And I think that originally these are created for use in machines that had floppy drives that maybe don't work anymore, but you still want to use the machines. And you say, well, like a PC? And no, more like my stepmother has an embroidery machine that had a floppy drive on it, and so you pop the floppy drive in, and you could store embroidery patterns on it. And so there's machines like that, some of which are more industrial, some of which might still be kind of consumer-oriented, but that have floppy drives on them. And as retro computer hobbyists, we know that floppy drives don't necessarily last forever. And so that's what this is designed to replace.
Don't tell that to Jim O'Keefe.
Well, some of them last pretty well, I guess, or last longer than you might think. But so anyway, the question is, can you use this on a CoCo? In the stock sense, it's probably, there's a long thread, and I didn't really read every detail of it. But I think in general, maybe it's not with a stock one, because it uses a different sector size or whatever. It's really designed for PC style floppies, and so it doesn't implement every aspect of what a floppy might look like in real life. But some people have figured out how these emulators work and have written their own firmware. Most well known of that is for the Amiga, which probably isn't still quite right, because that's a different style of floppy disk usage. But it sounds like there's some firmware you can load on the GoTech floppy emulators that then can make them useful for CoCo, but Well, I certainly don't have the details to give you here, but there's a link in the show notes for that thread, and you may want to wade through it and see what you can learn. Have you ever tried to use one of those emulators with a CoCo, Neil?
Not with a CoCo, but I do have bad memories of a GoTech, unfortunately. I want to admit this, but I got one in an Amiga lot, and I figured, well, I'm going to give it a whirl, right? So I hooked it up to an Amiga board, and I didn't realize that on the Amiga, the 12-volt and the 5-volt is in a different spot.
Oh.
I'm sure you can understand what happened.
Yeah.
That was the end of the GoTech adapter. And even the USB key at that matter, that was toast as well.
Oh, wow.
You file that in G.
Well, that sucks. Well, anyway, moving on. Our next news item, this one comes, I'm sorry, I didn't announce that. The GoTech thread was started by Frank Swigert, Swigert. I'm not sure the actual pronunciation there. Anyway, our next item comes from Paul Thayer, and he's posting about some sprite editor improvements. And so it's one of those where sometimes when you write software, especially for the retro computer like the CoCo, you end up writing some tools to go along with it so that you can manipulate graphics images and then transform them into a format that's useful for your program or that sort of thing. He's got a tool that he's been working on. It was originally written in BASIC, I guess, but it's cool, but maybe so slow that you could only run it in the emulator with the extra speed that you could turn on in some of the emulators. But I think he's working on it now where you could actually run it in a useful way on a real CoCo, because he's getting some help from Simon on some assembly code to work with it. Anyway, it looks like a cool project. He's been using the tool for writing his. He's working on a caveman game, and he's working on a blocked game. But it's like a little paint program, but it's a paint program oriented towards doing graphics for games. Anyway, it's not a release yet. Hopefully that'll come eventually, but it's out there. It's neat. Take a look. Link in the show notes. The next couple are from Jim Gary. One is an announcement. He's written a 10-liner text adventure in Microcolor Basic. So a lot of them, in the retro computing community, there's a lot of little contests like this where what can you write in 10 lines of basic code or whatever else. And so that's what he's got here. Is he's written an adventure game. So, it's like Get Lamp, Fight Monster, whatever. I haven't played his game, but that style of game, kind of like Zork or whatever, but written in BASIC for the MC10. So another impressive achievement from Jim. So pretty cool stuff.
I'm actually amazed you can get a game running with 10 lines of basic code.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one is also from Jim, and it's more of an announcement. But apparently Jim, for whatever reason, reached out. Well, he reached out to James McKay. And who was James McKay? Well, so he was back around, 2009, something like that, maybe before. He did some games for the CoCo, including one called Glove, which is basically a Gauntlet style, of maybe a clone or play-alike of Gauntlet. And he also had done a game called Death Chase, which is apparently a port or remake of a game by that name, which was well known on the Spectrum, the ZX or ZX Spectrum. I wasn't familiar with it until his port arrived. But anyway, they're both pretty competent games written for the CoCo. And I guess Jim was looking for some options for inspiring people to port some code back to the MC10, I guess. But anyway, his announcement is that Jim McKay, or James McKay, is releasing the code. He's announced the intent to release code for Glove and for Death Chase. And then later on in the thread, he does actually release the code to Death Chase. Hopefully Glove is still coming. We'll see. If you are interested in seeing some assembly code for a highly competent game for the CoCo, well, there it is. You may have to dig through it a little bit, figure out how things run. I looked at it, and the build process is a little complicated, or a little more complicated than some, but you can figure it out. It's all pretty neat. So there you go. If you're looking for an opportunity to read some game source code in assembly language, there you go. I know you're going to jump all over that one, right, Neil?
I was going to say, it could be a good way to learn, right?
It might be. It also might be a way to be intimidated away from it. So the glove was available in the past, at least. It may still be on cassette. I think I've actually got it around here somewhere, but an actual like published cassette that someone had done. I'm not sure if Death Chase is available other than through whatever downloads have been made available. Death Chase is pretty neat. It's like you're riding a motorcycle through a forest, and so the trees come at you. It's kind of like the evil or the speeder scene in Return of the Jedi. So it's kind of cool. Anyway, so moving on. Next couple are actually from Tim Lindner. So I think we mentioned in an earlier episode that Tim is reproducing the program pack boxes that Radio Shack used, the gray cardboard boxes. And so his look, to my eye, they look just like them. Anyway, he's got them available for sale. You can get them either flat or already glued. He has a order form, which is through a Google Docs page, I think. So anyway, if you're looking for some boxes to augment your collection or to better display your program packs or whatever you want to do with them, there they are. I haven't got any of the gray ones. My boxes are basically the same, though, and very nice quality, very strong, sturdy. Definitely gets an A+ from me.
Cool. I was just going to say, I like those boxes. I've always preferred them over the plastic ones that Tandy went to later on.
Yeah, I don't really like the bubble packs.
Can't really do much with them on your shelf.
Yeah, they don't stack very well, that's for sure. They probably display better.
Right.
On the hanging on a hook somewhere. But, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a shame. It's a shame Tim didn't make his boxes available with the little plastic hook that you could stick to the back and hang them on a hook. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Also, from Tim, he started a little thread on the mailing list about affectionate nicknames for Radio Shack, things like Rat Shack or Rad Shack or The Shack, that sort of thing. People had a few others.
Radio Scrap.
Radio Scrap. And then eventually at the end, he put together a little, he had a link in there that you could go to and vote on which one you liked. I'm not really sure what the point of the vote was. I don't know if he ever announced it or whatever, but it's still out there. You can go and vote, and it's got samples of each one as if they were appearing on one of those boxes we just mentioned. So I don't know if maybe he's going to produce boxes with the Rat Shack logo or what. Anyway, it's out there. You may want to go and take a look. Okay, the next item, we get a question raised on the mailing list from Christopher Fox. He is asking about Platform Studies book. And so what is platform studies? Well, so there's a notion of it's almost like a new discipline in computer science that a couple of guys have been trying to push, Dr. Nick Montforth and Ian Boggust. I'm not sure the proper pronunciations there. But anyway, so there's several books in this series. It started with Racing the Beam, which is about the Atari 2600 and they're interesting in that they're interesting for guys like us, shall we say, in that the books cover both the historical perspectives of the platforms, kind of how they came about and what was the environment that they kind of were developed in, but then also goes into some of the technical aspects, and most of them will go in and they'll describe how the machines actually work and how they're programmed. Usually most of them do some amount of digging into code and describing how certain programs work, that sort of thing. Anyway, we'll have a link in the show notes to the Platform Studies and a series of books. You should check them out. I basically recommend all of them. I haven't read all of the books in the series, but the ones I have all been pretty good. Anyway, so the question is, or the suggestion is that somebody should write one for for the CoCo. Boise Pete chimes up that he and I had discussed, Boise and me, John Linville, had discussed writing one, but then basically that, as he put it, that I wanted to work on other stuff and that he had his own projects. That's basically correct. I'm not sure Boise and I had really reached agreement on how the book should go, but I think both of us would still like to see one written, and probably both of us would like to participate in writing one. It's just a matter of finding the time to do it or whatever. I've got material that I've provided on my blogs and then some of the technical segments here on this podcast. I think some of that could feed into such a book. I think the platform studies books also need to incorporate a certain amount of history to discuss the environments in which the machines existed and that sort of thing. I think, Boise's already written a history book on the CoCo. I think he was a little shy about getting too deeply into history in a second book. I didn't really want to go too deep either, but I think that needs to be there. So I don't know. We'll see. At some point, we might figure out a proposal that we both like to do, or one or the other of us might go off and do it on our own, or who knows. But right now, we don't have one. So I think we'd all like to see one. But hopefully we'll get there eventually. You want to write one, Neil?
I definitely like to write one. But I think you'd have to have the knowledge for that first. I mean, I don't know if I'll be the right guy.
No. So the next item is VCF East tickets are available for online sales now. So we mentioned VCF East in the announcement section, but this is new where you can go off and buy the tickets in advance. They save you a few minutes at the door, that sort of thing. Make of it what you will, but I think it's a good event, and you may want to be able to buy your tickets early. All right, moving on. This is from Johan Vandenbrand, something like that. Johan, if I mispronounce your name, please let me know. So we've got, this isn't strictly about the CoCo, but it's setting up a modern tool chain for Vectrix development with CMOC. So, of course, we've mentioned the Vectrix before as a gaming system that uses what has vector graphics with a built-in monitor, but it uses a 6809 CPU, which, of course, is the same as what's in the color computer. And then in this case, he's using CMOC, which we have discussed, which is originated as a color computer coding tool for a C-like language. Looks pretty good as far as the C-ness of it. But so anyway, he talks about using CMOC and LW tools for building for the Vectrix. There's probably some insight there that could be useful for using those tools on the CoCo as well. I thought it was an interesting read, so maybe you will too, so check it out. Okay, our next item, not really news per se, but it's Josh Harper is somebody who's been in the community for a while. He occasionally posts stuff that he's looking to buy, and I think that's fine. People do that, and sometimes it's a way to rattle the cage a little bit and remind people that they might have stuff that they don't need anymore, and that provide an outlet for those things. Anyway, so apparently Josh is looking for Real Talker, which is I guess it's a hardware pack, right? That does text to speech kind of translation. And so anyway, so that's fine. But then he got a couple of responses, sort of saying, hey, you've been asking this a bunch. Maybe you should stop asking. That's kind of was the gist of them, at least some of them. Someone else said, well, this is the first time I've heard the request. So I don't know. What do you think, Neil? Is it bad form to post that stuff to the mailing list, or do you think it's okay? Or
I think it's okay. I mean, it's a good way to actually find out, because some people might actually have these things and they don't know what to do with them.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think there's anything really wrong with it. It probably is the kind of thing that you do it too much, it starts to get a little annoying to some folks. So, Josh, we're not picking on you, just using it as an example. We've seen other people do this as well. I want to just be aware that, it's fine to do. Most of us probably think it's fine to do once in a while. Some people will get annoyed. So manage your own brand with that in mind. So. Okay, well, moving on. We got an item from Nick Marentis. It sounds a lot like the item I think we had last month from Nick Marentis. He's got another chapter of his Popstar Pilot blog out, chapter 25. I think last month he had Chapter 24. Still sounds like progress.
This is exciting.
Very exciting. It says it starts getting hard from here on. It's the last line of his. I don't know. Hopefully that's an indicator of progress and not not a white flag coming, huh?
Yeah.
So hopefully, well, Nick, you keep up the good work. We're enjoying the reading. Okay. His next item was from Boise Pete, and he forwarded something that is an announcement. There's a machine, it's a set of machines from Commodore called the Commodore PET that basically date back to the same era as the TRS-80 Model 1. Then first released around 1977, I think. Anyway, later in the PET line, there was a version called the Super PET, which was a cooperation between Commodore and I guess the University of Waterloo up in Canada. Anyway, so the Super PET had a 6809 processor. I think you actually had a version of OS 9 that would run on it. There were some other software packages that would run on it. I'm not really sure why it existed, but it did exist, and it's kind of sought after. It's a bit rare, and like I said, sought after certainly by Commodore PET collectors, and then I know I would like to have one based on the 6809 angle. Anyway, like I said, they're a bit rare, but there's some people have been working to recreate it or recreate a conversion board so you can convert a normal Commodore PET, or at least certain models, I guess the Commodore PET 8032 specifically, into a Super PET. Boise reminds us that it's coming, and it sounds like maybe there'll be some differences there between, well, I'm not sure if it'll be different than the original Super PET or not, but pointing out that you should have a machine that could run OS 9, somebody should be working on getting Nitrous 9 running on these boards that convert to the Commodore PET to the Super PET. They're being called a Super PET 2 board. So if you're looking for a project, you want to do some system level stuff with Nitrous 9, and you've got a Commodore PET laying around the house, this may be your project. So why don't you go sneak around there, the University of Waterloo, Neil, and see if you can dig up a Super PET for us.
That's only about an hour away from me. Close.
Cool.
Also would like to find the prototype original Mac. I hear that had a 6809 in it as well.
Yeah, I think there was an early prototype, but yeah, that'd be cool to find. I don't know how many of those boards ever really existed. Anyway, moving on, we've got something from Tony Capolini on the mailing list. His title is Forth for OS 9. That's Forth, Forth, as in the name of a ancient computer language. And so he posted a link. It says, do we have any Forth fanatics here? And the link takes you to something called Ninth Forth, which is a clever name, I guess, for OS 9 on the 6809. And then that has a couple of PDF files and then a link to a GitHub repository. I don't know. So Brett Gordon's kind of the resident Forth guru in the community, I think, or certainly he's a Forth activist, shall we say. And he seemed to take a look at some of this, and he seemed to be able to make some sense out of it. I look at it, and I'm not really sure what I'm looking at. There's some code there, but I'm not really sure what it's supposed to do. Some of it's in Go, which is a language that's not super new, but it hasn't been around forever, and I'm not an expert at Go. If anything, I'd probably prefer not to use Go. But I guess he's got a Forth compiler written in Go available through GitHub. Anyway, if that sounds like something that would turn you on, you definitely should check out this link. And if you want to use Forth on OS 9, maybe you should still check out the link if you can figure out how to use it. Sounds like cool stuff.
Maybe Jim O'Keefe would be interested in that. I know he was hacking around with Forth last year at the fest.
Yep. Moving on. So we have an announcement from the MAME project, the Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator. Sometime back, MAME kind of absorbed its cousin MESS, the Multiple Emulation Super System, I guess what that stood for. Anyway, they always were kind of shared certain parts of the code base, or they have become one code base, although it's in C++ now, so it's a little less accessible in my opinion, but what do I know? I'm just an old C guy. But one problem that MAME had over the years is that they had a kind of a silly license, in my opinion, as an open source guy. They had a license that said, well, you can have the source, but you can't use the code for commercial purposes or whatever, which, of course, there are a lot of things that seem to be using MAME or MES for what appeared to be commercial purposes, so I'm not really sure where all those products were. Maybe it was just too hard to police. Anyway, the big announcement, of course, is that they have done the legwork and contacted their contributors and such, and have now relicensed MAME under. Still sounds like it's a combination of BSD and GPL licenses, but either way, it's now a real open source project in terms of free software. So no special exclusions based on usage or whatever. It really is a free, as in freedom kind of software. So good news, pretty exciting stuff. If you want to use MAME on a project but were reluctant to because of the licensing, well, now maybe it's a little more open for you. Or if you wanted to contribute stuff but didn't like the weird no commercial use aspect of the license, well, that's gone now. Very exciting stuff.
I think that's going to open up more projects with MAME.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully it'll shut up all the MAME haters on, on the list. I don't know. At least I wish they'd at least to figure out that it's MAME now and not MES anymore, because it seems like whenever somebody wants to complain about MES on the mailing list, they think they're really clever by saying, "Well, MES is a mess." And it's like it's kind of an old joke. But so MES is a MAME now, so you get maimed by using MAME now. All right. Who knows? Anyway, so hopefully that the licensing change will be of benefit to the public. If nothing else, it probably means that it should be able to be included as part of the main repositories in Linux distributions that have strict licensing requirements like Fedora. So that's a plus. All right. Well, moving on. I think we mentioned this link earlier. Barry Nelson has a DriveWire version of his Ultimate VHD project. So we mentioned this, I guess, in the CoCo SDC Ultimate image. So this is his Ultimate VHD for DriveWire. It's an update. Probably should have consolidated those, but oh well, here we are. This one may already be old by the time you hear this. This next link's from Glenn Vandenbigler. This was his last week before the move, and so this is talking about his CoCo Lounge website, which of course is for some reason not coming up now. There we go. He's moving to a new location in a week. He's trying to keep things open, but he's got some logistics issues. I think since this, I think over the weekend he was saying that if you had any orders in process, he was actually throwing in some free stuff, probably because he just didn't want to move it all. But best of luck to Glenn in his new location for the CoCo Lounge. He does dig up some cool stuff every once in a while, so it's good to keep that around in the community. Okay, next item is from John Strong. MCX 128 cases are now available. The MCX 128 is a hardware add-on for the MC10 that was created by Darren Atkinson sometime in the past. And basically it adds, it's got an extra ROM that extends the basic programming language on the MC10, plus it's got some bank switching technology in there to enable more memory for use on the MC10. So it's a cool little card. Like I said, it's got more ROM and more RAM, basically. Anyway, but it's traditionally been delivered as a bare circuit board, and you just plug it into the back of the MC10, and it sticks up like a fin, and it's got chips soldered on it, and it's kind of neat looking in that respect, but maybe not the most professional looking thing, right? So John Strong's been, he's got a 3D printer, a plastic extrusion kind of additive manufacturing device that he's been using to make, I'm not sure what all he makes, but he definitely makes cases. He's been making cases for the CoCo STC for some time. And so now he's got cases available for the MCX 128. And so if you have one of these devices that Ed Snyder's been selling for a while, then you may want to talk to John Strong about getting one. It sounds like they're $15 each plus postage. One caveat is later Ed Snyder, Zipster, came along and pointed out, apparently his board has had at least 2 revisions that have been out in the public with some slight differences, maybe a different connector used on them, and then plus the original run of boards that came from Darren Atkinson also was some slightly different dimensions on the board and a different connector, and so these other runs of boards probably don't fit, and it's turning out that that's the case. And unfortunately, I didn't see this warning until after I'd ordered a case from John, and I have one of the original boards from Darren, and it doesn't even come close to fitting. So John Strong, actually is a very nice fellow, is offering, he actually offered to design a new case around my board if I would make it available to him, which I may still do. He also offered to alternatively to take the board back, refund the money. That's nice. And someone else had the same problem. They had one of the earlier boards from Ed that also didn't fit. So made the same offer available there. So nothing to fear there. If you're dealing with John, he's a good guy. He'll take care of you. And Ed was also making some offers of accommodation as well. So both are good guys. It's a great community. So don't be afraid to buy and try. But if you want to avoid that hassle or whatever, you may want to consider when you got your board and who you got it from, and may want to seek other options in certain cases. Anyway, good stuff. So the next item comes, I got it from the Vintage is the New Old website. There's an effort out there. Neil, are you familiar with Stack Overflow, the Stack Overflow website?
No, I'm not actually.
Okay. I think they tend to cater more to programming stuff. I didn't know if they had any IT stuff out there that you might have run across, but a lot of times when you Google these days for a programming related problem, if you find an error message from your compiler, or if you're wondering if you're Googling for how to solve certain kind of programming problems, inevitably you'll find a link that takes you to this website called Stack Overflow. And it's kind of a social, it's almost like a forum site, although I don't think it's organized quite the same as a forum site. But basically you can pose questions and people can answer them. And the idea is to consolidate the answers to the questions so that you don't have to answer the same question over and over and over again, is the idea, right? Yeah, well, it's a pretty good idea overall. So I guess kind of similar to some other sites, I guess Stack Overflow has some amount of organization where you can break it apart and address different topics under broader classifications. And so there's some effort now to get a retro computing section to Stack Overflow. The link's in the show notes. You may want to check it out. My impression is that they've got a process there where you kind of propose the idea and some number of people have to view it favorably, and then you move on from there to a certain amount of people committing to participate or whatever. And anyway, I don't know the whole process, but it's moving along. And at this point, they're looking for people to commit to participating there. I think if you say you will participate, I think that's factored in by how much participation you've already done at Stack Overflow. So if you don't know what Stack Overflow is, it may not matter if you promise to participate, but if you are a Stack Overflow user and you are a retro computing person, you may want to go and cast your vote or make your commitment to participate and see if you can get this retro computing part of Stack Overflow off the ground. Make sense to you, Neil?
Well, I do know one thing: Stack Overflow. That's not good.
Well, Stack Overflow in general is not good, but the Stack
Yeah.
Overflow website is probably pretty good.
It's good, but the error message.
Yeah. Okay. So the next item, sort of a status update, I guess, from Mark McDougall. Mark McDougall has, over the years, has done a number of kind of porting projects for games on a number of platforms. Actually, if you look at some of his website stuff, he's done some cool stuff. But specifically to the CoCo, he did a Load Runner, and so now he's working on a game. It's another game I'd never really heard of, but it comes from the ZX Spectrum land called Knight's Lore or Night Lore. It's Knight, like with a K, like a guy in armor, and Lore, Lore. It looks like some kind of graphical adventure game. I don't know a lot about it, but anyway, he's working on it and has got some progress posted, and he's got a blog where he talks about some of his porting stuff, and I noticed he's got a couple of dozen entries in there within the past couple of months, so he's definitely been active. Anyway, if you're interested in the progress of porting projects for the CoCo, you may want to check out Mark's site.
I really hope Mark pulls this off, because I've actually been following the game Night Lore. Well, not really following it, but I know about this game because the Retro Gamer magazine.
Yeah.
That's UK based, so they do a lot of ZX Spectrum material in that magazine. And that's a really good isometric adventure game, if you're into isometric style games.
That's true. It's that kind of like Zaxxon, where you're kind of looking at it from the up and in the corner kind of view.
That's right.
Yeah,
I haven't liked these kind of games, so I'm kind of excited to see if he can pull this off.
It does look like a cool project. We'll see where it goes. All right, so moving on, the next item. This is from Ed Snyder, also known as Zipster. Ed's been doing a lot of hardware projects over the past couple of years in the CoCo community, a lot of them related to video for whatever reason. And so his latest project, he's showing, I don't know if these are available yet, or he's just showing that he's got the design committed to a circuit board. This is the CoCo 3 RGB to component video board. And so this is going to plug into the RGB port on the bottom of a CoCo 3, so red, green, blue analog video data, and then output to the component video signals. So not quite high definition, or somewhat high definition, or higher definition than composite video, but not quite as good as HDMI. Anyway, that's the YPBPR. There you go. Also, I guess it's got a fourth output for just regular composite as well. And I think actually this may provide a way to actually get artifacts through the RGB port on a CoCo 3. I'm not sure if that's panned out yet or not, but that was speculated. So that would be cool. So I don't know. I'm not sure if going through the RGB port to then go back out to composite video is any better than just using the composite video on a CoCo 3, but I don't know. It might be something that could work. I don't know. Maybe on a PAL CoCo. I don't know. Maybe that's not useful. But anyway, he's got the design laid out. I'm not sure if he's got it back and tested it yet or not. But we'll be looking forward to some more information as it comes available. So this next one, I had to kind of look up what he was talking about. But it comes from Per Surratt, who's out in the Dragon community. Does a lot of cool projects. And so it's automatic booting for drive 1 on start of the DP50 extender. So I had to go and say, okay, what is the DP50 extender? And I guess DP50, it stands for DOS Plus 5.0. And DOS Plus is one of the DOSes available for use on the Dragon. And at some point in the past, I guess Per had produced this DP50 as something that could run on CoCo SDC. And so, as you know, in the CoCo community, a lot of people are working on different things that can, even the CoCo SDC is designed to use an SD card to emulate a floppy drive, but there are some tools available to use the SD card in closer to a native fashion or whatever, so that you can use the SD card as an SD card instead of using it as a floppy drive. And so I guess this is what he's talking about, is on your Dragon, booting up Dragon DOS, or DOS Plus in this case, on your CoCo SDC. Maybe you can boot from drive 1 I don't know. Maybe it says drive 1. Maybe that is one of the emulated floppy drives. I don't know. Hopefully, if you're a Dragon person, you can figure out what I'm babbling about and go check it out through Pear's links. There's some cool stuff. So if you follow the link in the show notes through Facebook, there's another link that takes you out to World of Dragon. Hopefully, that's enough information. But there it is. If you want to, if I say you want to boot from Drive 1 using DOS Plus 5.0 extender, if that makes sense to you, well, then follow the link and check it out. That makes sense, Neil. We're getting to the end of a very long news segment. I'm feeling a little loopy. Okay. So the next item is there's a relaunch of the Retro Gaming Times. And so what is that? Well, so the Retro Gaming Times is a web-based newsletter that talks about, gaming on retro computing or retro computing-like things, like the ColecoVision, for example, or old gaming consoles and that sort of stuff. But the Apple II, whatever. This used to exist, and it used to be called the Retro Gaming Times Monthly. This appears to be a bi-monthly retro gaming newsletter, so maybe that part's changed. There has been some CoCo content in the past. I don't see any in the current issue, but maybe there will be in some future issues. Either way, it's kind of some cool stuff. There is some Apple II and maybe some C64 stuff in there. So anyway, you may want to check it out, take a look.
I was happy to see that they're going to reissue this. So I used to enjoy this newsletter.
All right. Okay, so the next item, this is from Steve Strobridge, or Stevie Strobridge, obviously a big fan of the show. Steve, we love you. Steve is announcing that he now has over 100 color computer game videos on his YouTube channel, a couple of which are live marathons of an hour to 2 hours where he did on-demand games on request. Cool stuff. Anyway, if you like watching people play CoCo games on YouTube, then this is the guy. This is the one who you should be looking at. He's probably got more of them on YouTube than anybody. And he's a pretty good showman and an all-around nice guy, so definitely go and check out Steve's website. He's got a CoCo-oriented website. I'm sure they're available through his YouTube channel. Go and check it out.
And if you'd like to meet Stevie, he's going to be at CoCo Fest this year.
That's right. So we've got two people. We've got Lee Patterson and Stevie Strobridge. We are cool guys, man. We are bringing new people into CoCo Fest. This is going to be awesome. The biggest problem is going to be where do we go for dinner since we're going to have all these extra people. Awesome. Okay, so our late breaker news item, I had to add this after I'd already composed the rest of the news stuff just because it's that hot off the press. But our last news item is from Pierre Sarrazin. Pierre's is the guy behind CMOC, and he's announcing a release of 0.1.20 of CMOC. Very cool stuff. And it's the release notes, people optimizations added by Jamie Cho. There's a bug when the compiler would crash when you did size of on an unknown variable. It sounds like you have some more control over the length of the program or whatever. So that's probably cool if you're trying to fit a specific block of memory, that sort of thing. Good stuff. Just reading a lot of cool stuff about CMOC. It's cool to have a little compiler. People are using it for a few things in the community. It's cool that it's added some Vectrix support there. So, very cool stuff. So, Pierre, good job. Thanks for the tool. All right. Well, I think we are right at an hour of news.
Exactly 1 hour. That's pretty good.
Was recording. Well, maybe it won't be quite so long once the editing's done, but still plenty of news. So, like I said, we're trying to keep it a little short, but I guess overall it's a good problem to have. So keep up the good work, guys. Keep the community alive. But that's all for now on the news. We'll be back in a bit with some feedback.
Well, good afternoon. And my name's Tony Pedraza, and I am the host of the annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. We call it the last in quotes because we really don't know if we're going to have another one. And we haven't known every year for the past 17 years.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready. Feedback.
Feedback, yes. Well, this time we've got some feedback this time. It's always good to get a little feedback, and this time we kind of have a bumper crop. The first item, really a couple of items from our friend Mike Rowan. He provided both written and audio feedback, but we're going to start with a written one just because I thought it was so awesome. So he sends a note, and in his note he says he's praising the podcast, and then he says, "It really is like the days of finding a Rainbow magazine in the mailbox." It's hard to beat that. Can you imagine higher praise in the CoCo community, Neil?
That definitely made me smile when I got that email.
Yeah, so definitely cool. We do appreciate the sentiment there, Mike. And, of course, Mike also sent us an audio recording talking about the printer discussion that we had in our previous episode. So let's take a little break and listen to that.
Hello, CoCo Crew. This is Mike Rowan just giving you some audio feedback on your printer segment in Episode 9. Printing is not even something I do much on modern computers anymore. Email and the ability to view PDFs and send photos, they've relegated printing for me just to mostly legal documents like, tax forms or receipts or something like that on my modern laser printer. But dot matrix printing is a very cool retro thing. There's a lot of nostalgia about that. But as you say, there's not a lot of value to the printers, but that also makes them really cheap and easy to pick up some to play with if you want to have that experience. I saw a daisy wheel printer, a Tandy 400 series daisy wheel printer on Craigslist for 99 cents. And I almost picked it up because you haven't lived if you haven't printed on one of these really big, loud printers. So everyone in the whole house will know when you're printing something at 11:30 at night. Back in the 80s, it was probably, $1,500 for one of these printers. So if just for the nostalgia of it, if you can spend, $20 to pick up a daisy wheel printer and connect it to your CoCo and see what it's about, I think it's worth that experience. And then you can pass it along to someone else. That's been my experience with a lot of different, not just printers, but different CoCo things, just to satisfy my curiosity. Now, the DMP 105, I've got one of those on my shelf with the same scenario that you were talking about, Neil. I have a ribbon in it, but it's dried up, and re-inking is a messy business, but I'm hanging on to it because I'll get to it eventually one day, or someone will come up with a gee-whiz way of doing it that will make it easy. Maybe you and I, Neil, will have to be the ones that do that. The biggest challenge to working with printers is that they're huge. They take up a lot of space. Plus, you have to have space for fan fold paper, and a CoCo with an MPI already takes up a lot of real estate on a desk. So, even the printers I have, I don't pull them out to use them very much. I sold recently a DMP 132. I kind of regret it now because they're not that easy to find. But like the DMP 105, it had the 4-pin serial connector, so you could just plug it right into your CoCo without using a parallel to serial interface. But you can still get ribbons for the DMP 132. So some of the 130 series, I think you can still get ribbons for. I think you can even get them for the DMP 107. But those printers were not as popular as the DMP 105. As far as the color printer goes that you were talking about, yeah, there's probably no chance of ever getting one of those going unless someone comes up with a formula for the ink, because you got to realize too that it's kind of the victim of being built when it was built. It was kind of on the cutting edge of color printers, and there weren't a lot of standards or that the printer manufacturers were using yet. So the thing that made it really cool and unique and interesting is also what was, in the end kind of its undoing, because you can't get the supplies for it because it wasn't as widespread. I had an old Star Micronics NX1000 printer that someone had bequeathed to me, and it had some mechanical issues. So I was surfing for some parts just out of curiosity, and I actually stumbled into an outfit that was selling a Star NX1000 brand new, never even out of the box. So of course I bought it last June. So that's kind of my printer that I keep. So even since I moved, it hasn't been out of the box yet, but I know it's there. You can still get ribbons for the NX1000. If you keep your eyes peeled for a printer that you want to use with a CoCo, there's plenty of them to be had, even if it's not the exact model you had when you were growing up. So I'll wrap this up just by saying, it was a fun discussion, and obviously it made me enter the discussion here as well. I enjoy the CoCo Crew podcast very much. You guys are doing a great job. Keep up the great work. I hope to see everyone at CoCo Fest in Lombard, Illinois. Maybe I'll bring my Star NX1000 so you can bask in its shiny goodness.
Awesome. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good. Definitely mentioned some good points in there.
Yeah, so Neil, you hear there, you can get a DMP 132. You'll still be able to get ribbons. That, and you and Mike have a new project. You're going to have to learn how to do re-inking. So there's something you can be, when you're done playing with floppy drives with Jim at CoCo Fest, you can head over to Mike's table and you can get out your ink pads, and you can turn the ribbon while Mike pokes it down into the ink pad. What do you think?
Sounds like a messy job for sure.
Anyway, well, that should be fun. Mike, thanks for the feedback. You're a great supporter of the show. Good guy. We enjoy being around you. We'll definitely see you at CoCo Fest. Thanks for the input on the show. Moving on, this one's from Steve Strobridge. So Steve offered a little feedback last time about the technical segments, and I didn't actually take it personally or in any kind of negative way, but I think maybe the way I expressed myself made Steve think I did. So Steve says, I have no issue with the tech segments at all. I enjoy them. Well, Steve, I'm glad you enjoy them. I appreciate what you were saying, that sometimes they get a little thick depending on the person listening. We have to make the show appeal to a broad audience. So some people are a little more gear-headed like me. Some people are a little more interested in the games part. Some people just want to hear about what's happening on the mailing list. So we try to cover a lot of things. So it's no big deal. Certainly no hard feelings from me, Steve. I understand where you're coming from. What do you think, Neil? You still like the tech segments?
I do. I've learned a lot from them myself.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're going to talk this time about the Orchestra 90. Hopefully that'll be fun.
I'm looking forward to that. That pack's always been a mystery to me.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's an interesting thing, but it's more software than hardware, really. So next item is from Ed Snyder. He says, I'm not that interested in printers either, but I don't want to see them gutted. The carnage. Of course, he's got a big smiley there. But so, yeah, well, I think a lot of us are kind of in that situation where it's like, well, I'm not huge on printers, but I don't want to see any of this stuff right away in a garbage truck either. So probably all of us have a printer or two somewhere in the collection that not really sure why we have it, but there it is. I tell you, on the printer topic lately, I've been looking, there are some serial printers still available, or at least through eBay, and maybe it's still brand new, under the topic of receipt printers. And you'll see them sometimes where they're like 3-inch wide printers. A lot of them are thermal. Some of them are impact dot matrix printers or whatever. But yeah, you can still find them. I've been seeing them on eBay. Some of them have serial ports. Some of them have the old Centronics ports. And the newer ones that you're starting to see more with USB ports. But I've been meaning to get one maybe and see if I can hook it up to the CoCo and see what kind of output you get. But they're like, a thermal printer with 40 columns of print. That's kind of perfect for the CoCo, right? Because you can print your listings of your basic program, and they'll look the same on the page, on the paper, as they do on the screen, more or less. Yeah,
that would be cool. They still make those printers brand new, those receipt printers. I just set one up not long ago for a business in town here.
Yeah, did it have a serial port?
It did. It had both. It had serial and USB.
Yeah, so yeah, they're still available to some degree. So that's kind of cool. Moving on. So we get a new listener, David Bittner. He says, congratulations on the show and best wishes for his continued success. And so apparently David is also a podcaster. He says he's the host of a cybersecurity-related podcast called The Cyberwire. And he has a link here. I'll go ahead and put the link in the show notes. And, if you're interested, you might check that out. All right, so moving on. I think in the last episode we mentioned a project where you could program in Java for the CoCo from a guy named Mike Cohn. And guess who wrote in some feedback? We got email from Mike. Says, I stumbled on your podcast from yesterday. Thanks for the mention about Java Grinder. It's kind of weird because while I was looking for information on programming the CoCo, I actually found your stupid VDG tricks. So that's a blog of mine that talks about some CoCo programming and some related stuff around the 6847. So it's cool. It's nice to know somebody's out there reading that stuff, and glad we could provide some coverage of your project, Mike, and keep in touch, and maybe we can continue to have some symbiosis between us. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, sounds good to me. All right, well, that's I think that covers our feedback for this time. So we're going to take a little break, have an announcement from our sponsors, or something like that. And we'll be back in a minute for our host discussion.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savitz of Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. You're listening to the CoCo Crew. When you're ready to play with a real computer, play with an Atari.
Okay, welcome to this episode's host discussion. We've been doing this for several episodes now. It seems to be a popular section of the show, or at least that's what we believe. Or we enjoyed doing it, so maybe that's why we keep doing it. But anyway, so we pick a little topic and that we think is worth talking about or stirs up some controversy or whatever, and we beat it to death for a little while. And so this time is one I've proposed, and I usually like to propose my topics in like a little question, or at least I seem to do that. And this time my question is, but what does it do? And what I mean is when somebody asks you about your hobbies and you say, well, I like to collect computers from 30 years ago or 40 years ago even in some cases, and once in a while I'll hook them up in the back bedroom and write programs in dead languages to do computing in minutes what I could do on a modern computer in split seconds. It all sounds a bit silly to the masses, shall we say. And so when your aunt asks you, what do you do with that old computer? What do you say? So what do you say, Neil? I'm surely you've got somebody in your life that has no understanding or can't fathom why in the world you want to play with these old computers.
I've definitely been asked that before. There's no question there. I usually come back with saying video games.
Yeah.
I like retro video games. It's always been a hobby of mine, and they're different on every platform, right? So it's they all have their own feel and look.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty good answer. It's one of those that people feel like they kind of understand, something like that. Everybody likes to play video games, or most people, or even if they don't really like it, they at least understand that other people do. And they know that old games like Pac-Man are popular, so it's not a big stretch for them.
Right, it's kind of one of the easiest explanations to explain to somebody.
Yeah, I know. For years I didn't do a lot of specific programming on the CoCo, although I wanted to, but never quite seemed serious enough or whatever, And I wanted to do projects, maybe something on OS 9 or whatever. And, I dabbled here and there, but never really did anything all that impressive. And then even when I thought maybe I could do some, it'd be like, well, I could also do a similar project on a modern machine and accomplish a lot more, But when I got around to doing Farfall, suddenly the people seemed to understand why I was doing this stuff. People in real life, it's like, well, I'm writing a video game for an old computer. So, oh, that's cool. Whereas if you said, well, I'm writing a text processing utility for an old computer, they say, why in the world would you do that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think giving them the old video game answer probably establishes some shared understanding. Even if it's true, you might be somebody who doesn't play a lot of video games, but so that may not work for you. That's one that I struggled with in the past. I don't struggle with it anymore, but in the past I struggled with that to some degree, feeling like I had to justify it. And you really don't have to justify your hobby. It's just your hobby. It's just fun, and you just like it. It's like, why do you like oranges? Well, apples are so much better. Well, you just like oranges, right? You just enjoy it.
At the end of the day, you just have to enjoy it.
That's right. But one other thing similar to the video games thing, I've found that there's a lot of people who play with model trains, and grown men build model trains. There's hobby shops that exist solely for model trains and nothing else in them sometimes, right? And I don't know if it's super common, but it's common enough. People, if you said, well, I build model train sets, people will understand that. They'll kind of say, oh, well, I get that, right? Even though they wouldn't necessarily do it themselves.
That's true.
So that's kind of what I advise if you need to justify it to somebody. So, well, let's say it's kind of like a model train set. It's a computer version of a model train. And I think that expresses it to people who might not otherwise get it in sort of in the same fashion as saying, I play video games or whatever. And if that's not good enough, you can build a model train set and then hook it up to your CoCo, and your CoCo can control the arms going up and down of the track crossings and the lights, and you can switch to different tracks and all that stuff for you, right? So that'd be a good project, right?
It definitely sounds like a good project, and makes it easier to explain it.
So I don't know. So yeah,
the other cool thing I like about the retro community, well, the CoCo community for one thing, is just seeing the machine being pushed in ways that never was meant to go before. Like, say someone's writing a new game or developing some new hardware, stuff that was just never imaginable back in the 80s.
Yeah, well, I've done some stuff like that, with the my CoCo 3 video player, right?
And you can, for sure. I mean, I couldn't believe when I saw that running. That was actually the first CoCo Fest I ever attended.
Yeah, and so it's pretty cool stuff to me. But that's definitely one of those, and you show it to a kid, and they're like, "What is this crap?" Right? Because to a kid, they've never lived at a time when it was difficult to watch videos on computers.
Exactly.
Isn't that crazy in a way? And even my wife, I had to kind of tell her why it was cool to be able to watch videos on my CoCo and kind of educate her, this is actually hard to do. This is, the video is hard to get the graphics mapped in a way that's recognizable. It's hard to transport the video fast enough to get the data to the screen, that sort of stuff, So...
Whereas when I came to that CoCo Fest, and I didn't even know you then, and you had that running, my friend was with me. He doesn't even have a CoCo, and he couldn't believe it. Like, he still talks about it to this day.
Yeah.
On how that Color Computer 3 was running that Star Wars video.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, you kind of have to understand where the technology was to see that, and we forget really quickly. Some people may have never really realized that it was difficult, I guess. If you weren't really into computers back in the day, maybe it never occurred to you that displaying a video was difficult. But if you lived through trying to watch videos on computers in the late 90s, you should know that it was pretty difficult.
And crude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually think some of the stuff on my CoCo video player is actually better than some of the videos that I had in the late 90s on real PCs or whatever,
For sure.
But anyway, so I guess we could extend the topic a little bit. It's one thing if your aunt or your grandfather or whatever doesn't understand why you want to play with these old computers, but there is somebody who you kind of need to keep happy, and it's a different somebody for everyone, meaning, usually we have some kind of significant other, a wife or husband, a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever you're into these days, that, they have an interest in you doing sane things, and they have some interest in how you spend your money, both to make sure you're not wasting it, and because maybe the money is theirs or part shared with you. So I don't know. So how do you think is the way to sell it to your significant other if they don't automatically see the value of your hobby?
Well, if they don't see the value, I would say you just got to tell them it's a hobby.
Yeah,
comes down to that.
If they don't get that, well, there are family law attorneys available. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. I guess like you say, it's just it sort of has, and it kind of can become a non-negotiable thing. It's like, well, love me, love my hobby. Sometimes that's just the way it has to be, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I think it's always been that way with most hobbies. I mean, the better half doesn't really understand or doesn't see the value in it.
Yeah.
I know some guys into hopping up old cars, and, the wives never really, see into that. So.
Well, that's true. And usually, if you're like me, you can fill up a room full of old computers in a way it looks like a storehouse, but it's probably no worse than an actual storehouse full of greasy old car parts or whatever. And when I'm playing with my CoCo stuff, I'm, safe and warm and or whatever in my retro shed. I'm not out underneath a car in the freezing cold or whatever. So that's good, right?
And smaller footprint. We got that to go on.
It can be smaller. My case is probably not. But anyway, well, I don't know. So what do you think? You got any other ways to extend this topic?
I think that's a wrap.
Well, yeah, it's probably long enough on this topic. We have enough other content for this episode. So, well, anyway, I hope everyone's enjoyed our discussion, and certainly would love to hear your feedback. If you have a canned response that you give to people who say, "Oh, why do you want to do that?" I'd love to hear your response. Tell people that you're an actual secret agent from the KGB of the past or something like that. That'd be funny to hear.
I would like to hear if somebody has a way to convince their better half this is all worthwhile.
And if there's anybody who got talked out of most of their hobby by the better half, but the CoCo Crew is how you cling to your retro hobby, well, we'd love to hear from you too, because you definitely would need our moral support.
We're here for you.
And if you're in that situation, you definitely need to find a way to sneak out and get to Lombard, Illinois, in late April. Right? All right. Well, I guess
it's a business trip, right?
Exactly. It could be a business trip. Yeah. Depends on what business you're in. Okay. Well, that probably wraps it up, like you say. That's probably enough of this discussion for now. So, anyway, if you have any feedback, any comments, whatever, please feel free to contact us. Send us an audio recording. Send us some email. Whatever you'd like. Ask a question. If you think this topic sucked and you'd really rather hear us talk about something else, well, feel free to put that in the feedback as well. But, all right, well, that's probably enough. So we'll wrap up the discussion and move on to other things. All right? CoCo forever.
Okay, but why Tandy Computers? In a word, quality. We do it all, from custom-designed semiconductors to the finished product. Tandy business computers are manufactured in our own USA plants. We test and retest and test again to ensure one of the highest standards of quality in the industry.
And Radio Shack
Provides total service and support.
I'm convinced. Tandy Computers.
At Radio Shack Computer Centers. In business, for business.
Compose music on your computer and listen on your home stereo. Create highly sophisticated electronic music and sound effects. Both musicians and non-musicians can compose in 6 octave ranges in up to 5 voices. Simulate various instruments and percussion. Transfer mode allows you to transmit files via 300 baud modem. Hundreds of music files available on CompuServe. Yes, I'm talking about the Orchestra 90cc program pack for the Tandy color computer. This is John, back with our tech segment for this month. So we are talking about the Orchestra 90. This is a add-on device that will offer the ability to have improved audio output for your color computer. And perhaps surprisingly, this device actually is more about software than about hardware. So with that little editorial statement inserted, let's go ahead and get started. The Orchestra 90 device actually has its heritage in some earlier devices that were available for the other line of Tandy computers, particularly the Tandy Model 1 and later the Model 3 and 4. So I guess the history is someone named John Bokelman was an early pioneer in making music on microcomputers, at least in the late 70s. Published some music routines in the Computer Music Journal in 1977. Did some other early synthesizer work for some S100 based devices, which I think all had some hardware similarities to the Orchestra 90 on the color computer. But we'll leave that for the Trash Talk podcast to cover at some point. Let's see. The original device was the Orchestra 80 that ran on the TRS-80 Model 1. Supported 4-voice music synthesis. Sold through a company called Software Fair Limited. That was the company was formed by both John Bokelman and Brian Eggers. Later on, they revised the software to support 5 voices in stereo and some other enhancements to the music language, and released that as Orchestra 85. I think that also only ran on the Model 1. Later on, I guess Tandy became interested in the product and asked for some revisions and for support of the Model 3, 4, and 4P, so that became Orchestra 90. And then I guess Software Fair, specifically this John Bokelman, took it upon himself perhaps to develop a version for the color computer, and that of course is Orchestra 90cc. So when all of this happened, well, the copyright in the manual says the manual was copyrighted around 1983. Of course, most of the manual probably was derived from some of the earlier works anyway, because the manual largely covers the music language, and the music language is essentially the same amongst all those products. On Wikipedia, there's some information that basically I was just reading that's sourced from this Brian Eggers fellow of Software Fair. It says it was circa 1984 when he was saying that. But then I get to looking in the Radio Shack catalogs, which some kind soul has made available scans on the internet, and of course they have, right? It looks like the Orchestra 90cc, as it seems to be formally called, first appeared in RSC 15. It's a Radio Shack computer catalog 15, which was dated to 1986. At that time, it was released for a price of $79.95, which happens to also be the price that the Sound Speech Pack was selling for at that point. So there's some conflicting information about when the device originated, 83, 84, 86. I don't know. There's a review in Rainbow of March 86. It's like a new product review. If you have that issue, it's on page 189. So I assume that Rainbow wasn't in the business of reviewing old products like that. So it must have not been available until 1986, which it's kind of a late start for CoCo products in general, so that might account for maybe its lack of broader support, or at least be partly accountable. Anyway, I think that's most of the history. There's some links that you can read. I'll include them in the show notes. It's hard to separate out the history of Orchestra 90 from the history on the color computer from the history of Orchestra 90 on the other TRS-80s and from Orchestra 80 and 85. But suffice it to say that some early pioneers in computer music were working on Radio Shack hardware and supported the CoCo with a pretty impressive piece of software. But we'll talk about the software in just a moment. First, let's talk about the hardware. So one great thing about this device, if you get the manual, like so many electronic devices of the past, especially those that come from Radio Shack, there actually is a schematic of the hardware in the back of the manual, which is kind of cool. And then the schematic reveals, of course, that this is actually a very simple piece of hardware. There's a ROM, which of course contains the built-in software, which we'll talk about in a bit. There's a couple of chips that are used for address decoding, and in what is a very standard-looking circuit for this purpose on the CoCo. So you have the 74LS133, which is a 13-input NAND gate. And so when you talk about addresses in computer hardware, you think of addresses being represented as numbers, and particularly as binary or hexadecimal numbers. Hexadecimal is sort of like a shorthand form of binary. So the I/O hardware on the CoCo is in the range that starts with FF and whatever. That represents 8 ones in the highest order bits of the address, and so that's a lot of ones basically. And so typically hardware is selected with a low signal for an enable, and that's from convention for whatever reason. But so you end up with this big NAND gate that mostly takes on the job of saying you're in the FF range, and then there's a few more inputs left over after that for decoding the rest of the address. And then paired with that is a 74LS138, which is a multiplexer chip, or a decoder chip, really. So that takes kind of some of the other bits and breaks it out to one of 8 active low outputs from that chip. I know this is a little thick for some of you that aren't EE or computer engineering types or electronics hobbyists, but suffice it to say, this is a pretty standard circuit. It looks at all the ones at the front of the address, and then kind of mixes and matches a few of the bits that are remaining to boil it down to essentially 2 outputs that drive one of the 2 DACs. Each drives one of the 2 DACs or digital to analog converters that are part of this device. And so the DACs in this case aren't even real DAC chips. They've got 74LS374 chips, which are what are called octal flip-flops. So it's a flip-flop is basically a storage element for 1 bit, and you can set it or unset it. And then there's octal, so there's 8 of them on each chip, and so that represents 1 byte of storage. And then the outputs of these flip-flops are then fed into what is just an array of resistors, and so they're configured in what's called a resistor ladder, or an R2R configuration, which is a pretty standard way of converting a digital value to its corresponding analog voltage. And so there's 2 of these, and then that then feeds out to a couple of what are called operational amplifiers, or op amps, and these are actually 2 op amps on 1 actual chip. But anyway, they're there to kind of condition the signal, and they combine the signal also to go to the device has 2 stereo channels, but then it also will take those 2 stereo channels and combine them back to 1 mono channel that it can feed back into the CoCo to be fed out to the TV. So anyway, if I haven't already said so, if you're not already familiar, the back of the Orchestra 90 card has 2 RCA outputs, just like stereo audio equipment typically has. So you can hook them up directly to the speaker, or of course, like I say, you don't actually need external speakers. It can feed back in through the CoCo's audio output to the television. But anyway, that's about it. There's not really any other hardware. There's 2 digital audio converters, a little bit of signal conditioning for feeding back into the mono signal of the CoCo, and a ROM for some software, and that's it. So a lot of people hear the output of the Orchestra 90, and it's so nice, especially compared to what the CoCo typically produces, and they assume there must be some magic hardware in there doing it, and there's not. It's very, very simple hardware. There's 2 channels of it, which helps. It's the DACs basically are the same technology as what the CoCo is already using for producing sound. It's just that the CoCo normally only has 6 bits, so these DACs are 8 bits, so they have a little more precision to them, so then, a little less distortion. And like I said, there's 2 channels, so you can, have stereo output or whatever. But the hardware really isn't all that special. So most of the magic in the Orchestra 90 pack actually is in the software. So let's talk about the software a bit. So the built-in software for the Orchestra 90 basically has, it has a number of functions, but essentially it's a music language compiler or interpreter. Because it's a language, it has to deal with source files. So built into the Orchestra 90 software, there actually is some sort of system housekeeping kind of functionality that can handle file storage and retrieval. It can directly drive the cassette interface. I don't know if it does it itself or it does through ROM calls. I'm not that intimate with the software, but anyway, it provides provisions for driving the cassette interface for storing and retrieving files. It actually can also drive the floppy drive interface. And again, I don't know if that is directly modifying the registers on the floppy controller chip, or if it's going through the standard ROM routines. Maybe someone can answer that for me. It could be doing either. I guess that's an interesting question to find the answer to. So if you know that, please let me know in feedback. But anyway, there are commands for manipulating files on diskette. Something I thought was interesting, and I didn't really remember until I started reading that, and then it kind of scratched my brain that I kind of vaguely remember seeing this when I was a kid and thinking, oh, okay, so it's got this capacity for transferring files over a modem, but has it got special software that just does that? And so it looks like it's actually got basically a terminal program built in, a very simple one, similar to what is provided by, say, the Color Compact. But it was usable to log into CompuServe and read news or whatever. But then you could download a file to a buffer and use that for your musical score, or you could transfer your musical score to a buffer and send it up using the what CompuServe apparently referred to as DC2 or DC4 protocols, which were basically no protocol at all. Just send the bytes and hope they get there. Anyway, so I guess the DC probably stood for Direct Connect. I don't know what the 2 or the 4 stood for, but maybe they were the remnants of a name of some modem or something. Apparently, the biggest knock that the reviews were talked about the Orchestra 90 software is that there was no support for printing. So you could type in your musical software, you could save it in a number of ways and retrieve it, however, but you couldn't directly print it from the software on board. I don't know how big a deal that is, but it seemed to annoy at least the reviewers. But so you can plug up your printer while you're using Orchestra 90, as long as you're not using it for the modem capability. But you're not going to be able to print directly from it. Well, whatever. So, like I said, there is this built-in musical language. I haven't used it too recently, but I remember using it in the past. It's really cool, especially if you have any sort of musical background. So I don't have an extensive one. I did play some music in high school, just high school band kind of stuff. But it's like a lot of languages of the day. It's sort of built around a number of single letter commands, and so like a letter and a number, or a letter and maybe another letter, something like that. And you can use that to describe measures of music and which voice you're using and what notes are playing and how long they play. And there's ways to modify the kind of the tone envelope for the different instruments that you're using. It's pretty cool. A lot of fun. I remember sitting and getting into it one time and just trying to create a little tune that I had in my head and doing different variations on it and whatever. And especially if you're someone who's both has some musical interest and programming interest, it's like a nirvana, a heavenly place in between those two interests. Anyway, you can program up to 5 voices of music. I think you can designate which voice goes to which channel. I don't know if there's a maximum of how many voices you can put on a channel. Probably there is. So it must be like 3 on one channel and 2 on another or something like that. But maybe not. You can choose notes over a 6-octave range, which is a pretty reasonable range for describing music. You have a lot of control over your musical score. There were some of the various reviews talked about musical educators saying that this was a good intro, a way for teaching music theory. So it does cover a lot of stuff. It covers not just simple put the notes down in this order and play them exactly whatever. You can vary the timings of the music and all that sort of stuff. Your key signatures, your all that sort of stuff. Pretty cool stuff. And of course, with this complex language, there is a big manual that comes with it. It covers lots of information, and the manual is about 100 pages. Counting a couple of appendixes. About 100 pages in the manual. Plenty of information on how to use the device. You can do a lot of cool stuff. Apparently, in reading the reviews, there's some way to take advantage also of the high-speed poke, which I guess gives you a little better fidelity on the musical playback, and some hinted that you could do a slightly larger range of notes with that. I'm not sure if that's true. I also don't know how to enable that. I wasn't able to uncover that in my research. So if anybody knows how to enable use of the high-speed poke in the Orchestra 90 software, that would be a cool thing to have in the feedback. Well, that's about all there is to say. The built-in software is really cool on the Orchestra 90 for writing your own music, and it has a lot of capabilities even for people with kind of complex musical expression needs. So even if you're a fairly serious composer or musician, you can compose or transcribe existing musical scores pretty easily once you've learned the language, of course. It's a bit cryptic, but it seems straightforward to me. It's a lot of cool stuff there. You can write this score. You do have to take this separate step of scoring the music, which is akin to compiling a program. That seemed to vex some of the reviewers a bit. It kind of makes sense to me. You have to sort of process the notation sort of ahead of time, so that the actual kernel of code that plays back your musical score, is probably a tightly controlled assembly language program that doesn't have a lot of extra time for tracking the vagaries of musical notation, and it just needs to process data and shift samples out to the DACs. So it makes sense to me that you'd have to have this compilation step. Anyway, talked quite a bit about the built-in software. If you haven't tried it, if you have some interest in musical notation, I definitely recommend it. Beyond the built-in software, there are a handful of games that make use of the Orchestra 90 for some sound effects. I know John Strong said that his Soviet block game used it. I recall Steve Bjork saying he used it in some of his games. I'm not sure if that's 100% true or not. Not that he would have said that. I'm not sure I remember it is the truth. I'm not sure I'm remembering correctly, I guess is what I'm saying. But I thought that's what he said. So there's bound to be a few games out there. Maybe some of the homebrew stuff uses it. I remember toying with it, maybe being able to use it in my video player project for the CoCo 3. I think all the times I've demoed it, I've only used the built-in sound, but I mean, it really is just 2 DACs. It's just write the samples over there. There were some evidence. I think Curtis Boyle had done some conversion of a game like here we go.
Kyum Guy to be Ninja.
The Kyum Guy to be Ninja to use the Orchestra 90. Apparently that game actually had 8-bit samples to begin with and was just masking out 2 of the bits. so I guess Curtis had changed that to where it could use the Orchestra 90. Yeah, it looks like maybe John Strong's Gems game also uses Orchestra 90. I don't know, maybe there aren't many others. Like I said, it was released kind of not super late in the life of the CoCo. It was really about the beginning of the CoCo 3, but that's maybe late enough that plenty of other games had already been developed and the expectations were already kind of set that you didn't need to support something like that. Who knows? Certainly is easy to program. I've done it for some of my experiments and whatever. Beyond that, again, you're really talking about 2 DACs, or digital analog converters. So any application you might have that needs an analog voltage produced under computer control could potentially use an Orchestra 90 to generate that voltage. And so I actually have generated, I have an old oscilloscope with what's called an XY mode, which basically lets you use an oscilloscope like a vector monitor, where you actually draw on the screen directly. And so I've done some experiments where I'd use a Orchestra 90 pack hooked up to the X and Y axes of this oscilloscope, and then used it to draw on the screen circles or Lisa Ju patterns, which are kind of just funny swirly things that look like something that a mad scientist would have running in the background of their lab. You can use, like I say, you can draw different shapes or whatever. Since it's completely under the CPU control, it's a little hard to get too complicated with that. But it is possible to draw some stuff on the screen, on the oscilloscope screen, using the Orchestra 90. So if you have a vector graphics project in mind, you may want to keep that in the back of your head. Like I said, there's some beauty in simple hardware, as it can often be pressed into alternate service. Yeah, that's pretty much it. The Orchestra 90 is, like I said, it's 2 DACs. It's got a ROM pack in there for the really cool software that comes with it. And that's about it. So, whatever magic happens is all under software control. And so, there's no magic hardware in there. It's just a direct interface between the CoCo and the outside. So there you go. If you have a use for generating analog voltages, particularly for sound on the CoCo, the Orchestra 90 is probably your best bet. So I hope you've enjoyed this segment. That's about all the information I have to give on the Orchestra 90. And, like I said, use it for good. Okay? All right. CoCo forever. Bye.
Let the Radio Shack TRS-80 put the world of color computing into your home. Instant loading program packs turn any color TV into an exciting game arcade. And there's more. The color computer is an educational aid, a home management tool, an up-to-the-minute electronic information service. The programmable, expandable TRS-80 color computer from $399 only at Radio Shack, the biggest name in little computing.
Welcome to an exclusive CoCo Crew podcast interview. Today we have John Strong from Strongware on the line. Hey John, you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I'm a longtime CoCo user and programmer. I've attended Rainbow Fest. Actually had a booth at the last annual CoCo Fest. I've attended as many of those as I've been able to. Life does get in the way a few times. So day job, I'm a considered consultant. Work out of the house, and the company I work for is an IBM partner, and we have Fortune 500 clients that we take care of.
That sounds good. Can you tell us how and when you got involved working with the color computer?
First got involved with the computers way back when Popular Electronics published the article about the Missile Terror. And I read that and told my brothers that, hey, this is going to be spatial, going to do something. I don't know what it's going to do, but it's going to change a lot, because that's the first computer. I actually built a Cosmac 1802 out of plans from Popular Electronics. And when we decided we were going to get a computer, did a lot of research, and we knew we wanted to do games. And that's my brother Charlie and myself, I finally chose a 10D color computer. You had peek and poke, you could do assembly language and stuff with it, so I knew I could do some games with it eventually once I learned enough.
So the color computer was pretty much your second computer.
The first one was built on a solderless breadboard, and so it had like a whopping max of 512 bytes of memory. So I guess it is second, but first bought in one that was really a full-fledged computer that had a BASIC or anything was the Tandy color computer.
Very nice. I saw Cosmic Elf actually last year at VCF for the first time. It's kind of neat to see that.
Interesting processor. Okay. The first CoCo it started out at 4K, and we upgraded it to 16 first, I think, and then to 64 and extended BASIC. And before it was over with, we had a JNR banker, and I think we had the 512 in it. It's been a long time instead of just the 256.
Wow, so cool! The JNR banker. I've never known anybody actually have one. I've only read about it in the Rainbow magazines. That's a rare piece now.
Yeah, don't have it now, unfortunately, but
it's cool to say you at least had one, though.
Yeah.
I hear you have some new projects in the works. Care to share any of them with us?
Well, yeah. It's old and new, both in the works. We, of course, have the Bomb Squad, which is a Minesweeper type game, and waiting on some stuff to get here. And I got just a little bit of coding to finish on it. It's not a big deal, but my custom boxes from Tim Linder should be here sometime in the middle of next week. And I need to put together the manuals, do just a little bit of touch-up, and start programming the prompts.
Sounds good. And you're hoping to have these ready for CoCo Fest?
Well, I'm hoping a little bit before CoCo Fest, so I can sell a few and maybe order some more boards before CoCo Fest is my hopes. But, life gets in the way sometimes. You don't always go as planned.
That would be great to have them ready. And also for everybody listening, John Strong is also the guy behind the CoCo SDC 3D printed cases as well, just to let everybody know. You've been churning those out quite a bit, I hear.
Yeah, they've been going a lot longer than I actually expected. I posted recently, I expected to sell maybe a dozen of them or something, and it's a year now later, it's still going, and designed a couple more cases for the color computer community, and the most recent being a case for the MCX 128 memory expansion for the microcolor computer.
I see that. I saw the pictures you posted. It looks really nice.
Yeah, I was surprised that people responded so well to it. I did just a plain-looking case, and I thought, it doesn't quite look nice enough, because the 16K upgrade had kind of a little bit of sculptor's shape to it, and I can't quite do as much as what they can do with a molded case, but I thought, well, maybe I can do a little bit here and make it look a little bit nicer. And the response has been great.
Well, that's excellent. Our host, John Linville, I hear he got one.
Well, it just went out today in the mail for him, and so.
Well, that's great. You want to add anything, John?
Well, it looks like a nice case. Like I say, I haven't had an opportunity to mess with it yet, but I do have one of the MCX 128 boards. I actually got one of the originals from Darren before Zipster got into the business of doing them. Hopefully the boards are the same diameter or same size. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's nice to have some finished pieces so that you're not just exposing the circuits to the elements.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as much as I like to see a bare board, it's nice to have a finished product that is protected and it looks nice.
Well, the other interesting thing is, now that we've done the case, it's got Zipster or Ed Snyder excited about it, and he's done a preliminary design on a board for games, so we can have a plug-in game pack to it.
Yeah, I was reading that. I mean, that's really cool. I was even telling John Linville the other day, like, I can't believe all the MC10 projects all of a sudden. It's come out of nowhere.
Well, John and I are kind of friendly competitors. We're friends, but we compete. So, he does a ROM game, I've got to do a ROM game just to show him I can do it.
And speaking of projects, what are some of your future projects lined up for the color computer there?
Well, I've got, basically I've got to finish documentation and stuff up for GEMS 2. It's already has been converted to run out a ROM cartridge, and I've got to put together a package for that. So there'll be, as my dad says, if the creek don't rise and the good Lord willing, there'll be at least 2 ROM packs available from Strongware this year, if not more. And we have the Dr. Mario play-like game that you've been playtesting. I worked on a little bit.
I was hoping you were mentioning that. I didn't want to say anything in case you didn't want to record it here on the podcast, but I'm really looking forward to that game because you've sent me 2 versions now, and Dr. Mario was one of my favorite games back on the Game Boy.
Well, and I have these games that's in my mind I always thought should be available on the color computer. And as I play some old classics through emulators or stuff, I see other things that I would like to do, and there's a lot of cool stuff out there that never got to the color computer that would really cool to have it on there. And Dr. Mario was one of those. Again, it's using a lot of the same code that I use in the other games, okay? And so it made an easy thing to choose to do it because I had the code already written that I could put the stuff up there on the screen.
So that would help. You can share the code and
right.
Process a little bit.
So you can focus on the gameplay and the logic rather than have to rewrite all the graphic routines.
Right.
And talking about that, probably a little bit of background on the Soviet bloc and GEMS have been both reviewed in Rainbow Magazine years ago. Soviet bloc was actually written as a Christmas present for my brother. And I have 5 brothers, and but Charlie was the big gamer of the family.
Okay.
And but I was with my brother Steve, who lived in Indianapolis, and they had a Game Boy, and I'd seen Tetris before, and I picked up their Game Boy and played it a while, and I got to think, yeah, I could write that, And I thought, well, Charlie would really like that, so maybe I'll do something like that for a Christmas present. I haven't been able to break into the market in games, get anything sold, but at least I could do something cool.
Right.
And so I sat down and wrote in BASIC, okay, extended BASIC, of course, and a game that actually it played.
Mm-hmm.
Tetris, you could do that, but it wasn't smooth enough and it wasn't fast enough, so I started throwing some machine language routines in there, and pretty soon it's like, okay, I need to get rid of most of the BASIC here. And so the only thing that's left there is actually a loader for the high scores. And that was kind of nice because even though most hard drive systems used the documented ROM calls, there's a few that did a little funky things. And so by staying in BASIC with the loading the high score screens, made sure it was compatible with all systems. Because if they weren't compatible with BASIC, then they weren't going to run anyway.
Right.
And so that was the reason for keeping the high score screen loader in BASIC. The second advantage to that is you can actually change that BASIC program. So if you had multiple people in your family using the computer, you could actually have your own high score screens. Okay, just by changing the name of the high score that was loaded in and saved.
Right.
And you always run your own. So that was kind of the really kind of cool feature that was by keeping that little small part here in BASIC, is then you could extend that to if you had multiple families or people in your family is going to play. It was always kind of like, do I have to compete against him? He plays it for hours. Okay, I only play it occasionally. I'm never going to get on that high screen.
So you can swap the file, like you can have different files for different people, like different families.
Right. And so you could just, if you know BASIC, and just go in and change that, save it as a different file name, and run it. if you want to get fancy, you could create a menu program, but that's up to the user if they want to do that.
Right. Now, Soviet Bloc, that used the sound card, did it not?
Okay, that actually used the Orchestra 90 card. Okay, it actually sends data all the time. It doesn't need you to tell. It just sends it out there. So, if it's not on the bus, it just wastes the cycle, but it also sends it to the 6-bit at the time. So, as you move your blocks move from side to side, and then they make a sound, and that sound goes from side to side in a stereo effect as you play.
Oh, that's great. It's always nice to see games that support that sound pack, because I don't think enough of them did.
No, I think I was really the first game that actually supported that I know of. And so that and Gems supported that. Soviet Bloc, for those that know, is a Tetris-style game. And I actually made it a little bit wider and stuff. Tetris is very much a twitch game, as well as being a puzzle. So you got to have a fast twitch reaction, and as well as doing the puzzle. Well, by making it wider, it kind of changes it into more of a puzzle game than how fast you can react to joystick. You still have that part, but it makes you focus more on the puzzle because you got to fit more in there.
Right.
And the other thing in writing that was kind of interesting is if you look at the game, it's kind of a 3D kind of shaded effect on the pieces. And while writing the game, I had most of the graphics designed, and I thought, well, and I'd looked in, I believe I'd seen what Nintendo had done on their Nintendo system, okay? And they had changed the look from the PC, and it kind of looked a little bit more this three-dimensional, and I thought, well, this is cool. And so I went and changed that, and I was like, oh, no. Yeah, it's got to go in, but now the rest of my graphics look terrible. So I had to redo all the graphics, okay, in the game to make it match so it looked together. And so it was necessary, but it adds time and everything to it.
For sure, but it gives it the nice polished look, though. It does look nice.
Well, and that's the thing, people don't realize. We've had kind of two groups of people that did games. We had games that did the commercial quality games, and then we had those that did the disc games. And so, some they did like T&D, they were fun to play, but they didn't have that polish in most cases, okay? I'm not going to say in all, because I'm sure there's some out there, especially later after they bought the Tom Mix stuff. But you'd play it and it was like, oh, I wish they would have done this more to the game. Or, if they did just a little bit more on this game, it'd be a lot better game, And so I tried to make sure I put everything in there that needs to be in the game.
Yeah, I noticed your games, you're trying to go for the commercial look, like the polished ones you see in the store.
Yeah, and understand, most of the commercial stuff back in the day, except that was sold through Tandy, were homebrew, okay? We didn't call it that.
Right.
But they were, and, so they were small, one or two people groups for the most part. You had the exceptions like Data Stuff where, Steve York worked for a time and stuff. And a few of the others, they were doing the commercial stuff. They had commercial contracts and stuff with Tandy. But, most of the stuff that was made we call homebrew now.
Well, that's true, because if you look at games from, Nick Morentis, I mean, he had them published through the Radio Shack stores, at least some of his titles he did, but, that essentially was homebrew of today.
Yeah, we call them homebrew today.
That's right, yeah.
And so, but still I try to do them with a commercial level of a game. I do realize, and I'll say up front, that my music doesn't match some of the others. Yet I hope to correct that sometime in the future, but that's the one draw point. I don't have the background music playing that some of the other games go. But I do have the sound effects.
Right, so you're thinking of maybe later releases to add background music, like to play through the orchestra card, or?
Yeah, I'm looking at doing something like that, okay? Yeah. In fact, I've been hoping somebody else would do the sound chip on the card for ROM pack for me, so I wouldn't have to do it. But it might be something that I'll have to sit down here and do.
Now, that would be a nice feature.
Since we're talking, blue sky stuff, none of this is promises, okay? And I'll talk like I do at a CoCo Fest. I actually have a couple boards here that have a single chip MIDI on them that I've had for over a year, and I haven't found time to work with them yet because I'm so busy doing cases, working on CoCo games. But it's very possible to stick a whole MIDI system in a game pack now. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And, it takes time to do all of this. It takes money.
Sure. I mean, I think it's amazing how much you guys get done with having a regular job. It's just amazing how much you guys churn out in the homebrew community.
Well, yeah, and, sometimes that does affect what you do. It depends on how hard I'm working at the day job, and to how well I feel about working on something after I'm off. And for the CoCo community, as a consulting company, I'm not always really swamped busy during the day. And so, after it gets off, sometimes I really feel like getting in and just playing with the computer and do some cool stuff.
Well, that's good. You can get a little CoCo time in here and there. That definitely helps.
So, the Dr. Mario game is a very good possibility of it being out this year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that release. It's very good.
Because when I was looking through the code and playing it, it's actually pretty solid on the gameplay and everything. So it just basically needs to be the graphics and stuff to do.
Yeah. It looks like you pretty much have it complete. I mean, I tried everything to get it to crash, and it is smooth. I can't fault it at all. Even the combo pieces work.
Oh yeah, and not to kind of be smart aleck. It just, if I'm doing it, it's got to work. I'm not giving it out. That's not saying I'm great and super programmer that I just did it real easy. It just means I'm stubborn enough that it's going to work, or you're not going to see it.
Probably keep tweaking it too. I'm sure it's never finished.
Yeah, that's kind of that happens real easy. The second game that was actually I have a basic game that was sold commercially, and it's just a copycat. I know John has done a Simon type game for the color computer, and I did one, and it's all done in extended basic, but I just switched the colors to do the action. So nothing is drawn on the screen except for the score after the game starts.
Oh, that's neat. So that's how you can get it to run in basic at a good clip?
Yeah. And the background story behind that is actually one of the clubs that I belong to was having a contest. And I wrote that as a contest entry for the club.
Oh, that's excellent.
And then Gems, for people who don't know, is actually plays like Sega Columns.
Yes, it does. That's right.
And my brother, the gamer, was playing that and said, "Hey, I found a way to run the scores really up high in this, and it's real easy." And so we actually had to get out the Sega Master System and check it, and see if I had to do something that was I'd done something wrong in the gameplay, and didn't account for something because it's that easy to rack up the score in the lowest level. And we could do his trick and the same thing in the Master System, so it stayed.
That's excellent. Well, that's a great game.
Games I'd like to see, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. I'd like to see Prince of Persia for the CoCo.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
A full-fledged river raid.
Yeah, that's another good one.
They've done. I've seen one on one of the tape ones, but it's really not the same. It doesn't do the scrolling through it and so on. They call it River Raid on the tape there, but
it's a static screen game instead. Like there's no scrolling on it.
It's just not the same. It doesn't fill the full screen up and some things. I'm not happy with it. That's not to put the game down. It's just not River Raid to me. Okay.
It's not right.
Anytime you do a game, is as much as the person done. It's a lot of work. Okay. it's a lot of work to do a game and even not get it right, let alone getting it right.
I can imagine. I mean, there's a lot to it.
And so, yeah, I'd like to see River Raid.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my projects this year, but it may still be later this year, but not before CoCo Fest.
You got too much on your plate over there.
Well, I will squill. One of the reasons River Raid's on the list, I have done some background work on it and actually have some possible screens designed for a River Raid. But I have to get back to coding on it. So, but mine is targeted for the CoCo 3. I don't know if you're doing a CoCo 2 or a 3 version.
No, it would probably be for the CoCo 2 because it actually kind of fits in with the color sets available better than most games, I think. So
okay,
that's what I was looking at.
So even if you do one, we're not competing. Because I actually thought, if I did that, I'd probably need to do a CoCo 2 one. But let's see, Choplifter.
Yeah, Choplifter. That would be that CoCo never saw that either.
There's some of these are not that super hard games. It just takes a lot of time to do it right because they were commercial games. They were good games. They were polished well. The hardest one is probably Prince of Persia.
Yeah, to get that scrolling just right. That was a breakthrough at the time. Another game that I think the CoCo would run well as, I keep saying this, is Bomberman.
Yeah, I know you would bring that up because I've looked at that. Yeah. I'll probably revisit that sometimes. The big thing that I see about Bomberman, about Doable, and probably the reason I was easily distracted from it is the end boss uses up so much of that screen space.
Right. Never thought of that.
That's going to be pretty hard to pull off without the sprites and the overlay. I mean, not saying it can't be done. Yeah, it'll be a difficult feat to do, and which means that now I'm going to have to do it. But I don't know.
I think it's great, John, that you're doing these games because the color computer never saw a lot of these games that you're doing. I mean, even though they're kind of ports, of an existing game. I mean, the CoCo never got them in the first place, so it's great to see it on that platform.
Well, and I've always tried to do something a little different in the game, and in most cases do something a little spatial. You mentioned it in the Soviet bloc and GEMS and stuff that does support the Orchestra 90.
That's right, yeah.
And actually, if you had in Copycat, which is my Simon-style game, you can actually wire up a simple light pin and play the game with it.
Oh, that's cool.
And I think I mentioned it a little bit in the docs about it, on it. But, there's one of the joystick channels, you put a photocell, resistor with it, and then a switch, and then shoot it from light, and you hold it to the screen. I actually had used a light gun from a cheap video game that was just a photocell in it, a CDS photocell, and played it with that. So that was kind of the hidden trick in Copycat.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to go on eBay and order that light pen that I see. It's listed up there for a few days now.
And I actually bought some stuff. I might be making a light pen for that if I get time. It's just finding time to do all these projects. I go online, I see stuff, okay, I'll order this. So if I get around to the time doing it, I'll work the project. Fortunately, I got a wife who's really been great on understanding some of these projects. She loves to go up to the CoCo Fest, so that really helps.
That definitely helps. Yeah, I mean that's excellent.
And so there's a lot of stuff that can still be done out there. Like I said, it is possible to put a full MIDI chip on a game cart. You could do an Orchestra 90. Would be fairly easy to do nowadays. And just have the full stereo right on your game chip. And the cost, if you do it in the CPLDs, would be very minimal, okay, on adding it to a cartridge. You could probably do Orchestra 90 and the bill of materials definitely could be less than $10.
Oh, see, that's
Additional to what the game cartridge costs. Okay. At a glance, the bill of materials for a MIDI could possibly be less than $20.
yeah. See, that's great. I guess with technology advancements, it's possible to do these things now.
It takes all the development time and seeing, actually building it to see where you're right and you're wrong. And I really haven't done as much hardware in the past years as I did, because I got into this stuff actually through hardware. I can do a computer now. I can program it, add some extra chips to it, instead of having to buy a whole new set of integrated circuits for each project that I do.
Yeah, it sounds like too many projects and not enough time.
Well, that's always been the case. You got to keep your brain going, and
yeah,
and it seems crazy. I mean, some people, they make their money with their muscle, and others of us makes our money, our living with our brain. You got to keep it active.
For sure.
And you got to keep learning all the time, and the one thing they like me at work, I'm always pulling something new on them and doing something that saves them hours of time, and they like that.
I think with the projects, learning, that's the best part. I mean, finding out different ways to do things and something you might have not known before.
Yeah, I don't know if John this way. I always kind of like it when I do something that blows somebody's mind.
Well, sure. I think everybody likes that.
I do something, they look at it, you do that, and I do that at work too. I take a task that takes days, and I sit down. Well, it'll take me days to do. I can write a program that'll do that faster, and then I can do the task. And so I write the program and do that, and I'm still done quicker than what they expect. Now, we haven't talked about one of the things I do is I write tools to help to write my games, and so it's Oisin and John has. You guys seen him at the CoCo Fest, and
yeah, that was one of the first, the first times that you broke through on me observing what you're doing years ago. Was you gave a little talk at CoCo Fest on, I think that was some graphical drawing stuff that you could draw tiles for your graphics games. And you had a tool that would run on Windows, and you take the bitmap and turn it into a set of tiles and figure out which tiles were the same and or close and that sort of stuff. It was a pretty neat set of tools.
And I've never released that because I'm always, as I work on something, I'm always changing it. It's got a bunch of major changes going in it right now, again. And I sent Neil some stuff because he wanted to learn and stuff, a copy of it, but. Every time I play with it, it'll do that. I mean, now it does that. It'll do text stuff. For Bomb Squad, I added text effects, so it does drop shadows and stuff now. And it generates my text for that, and I bring it over in my code, and there I have it. I've placed it on the screen. And
it sounds like you're modifying that as you go, like for different games you're developing.
Yeah, it does. As I do something in the game and the graphics, it gets to annoy me because it's too hard. I jump out working on the game and then go over and fix it in the tool. And so now I can do it in the tool easier. And I can do compiled sprites. In fact, the mouse pointer in Bomb Squad and in Gems 2 is actually a compiled sprite. And that was done just straight from my tool set.
Well, that's got to save a lot of time as well.
And it does, like I said, I keep thinking of things that I need to add, and things will make it easier for the next game. And
the other feature I do like that you put in the games now is the high-res mouse driver. That's very handy.
Well, and I think I'm blown away that John and Nick and Robert was able to get this thing running and all the way there. And so I took their code, stripped it down a little bit. I'm still looking at some things. I think I haven't put in the current version because it's working, but I think there's some other ways I can tweak it and still get a little bit smaller code and maybe faster. and still work, but I haven't had a chance to try it on the actual CoCo yet. And so it saved me a little bit of space, a little bit of time in the game loop. But they have done a fantastic job with that. And I just, give them a hand clap.
Yeah. I must say, it is so nice not to have to plug in that high-res adapter.
Well, and there's stuff that, I thought about doing, but, you get high-res adapters, even a sample code is a pain to work with. And trust me, I've done it. And so, having that routine that works as smooth as it works, it's that, Nick, John, and Robert, reach around, grab your stuff, pat yourself on the back.
Yeah, and not to mention, not everybody has a high-res adapter. Even newcomers to the CoCo, they might not even know what that is.
Well, and that's the other thing is it's there, and I had a commercial font editor, and I didn't use that. One, I don't know if it was quite out at the time because I did that the very early days of the CoCo 3. And you couldn't depend on people having it because they weren't out very long.
Right.
And so I really have a pretty nice font editor. And it doesn't use a high-res routine. You use a joystick or mouse and you switch between modes in it. And so that's actually what I've created my fonts with and such. And it's used in my games. That was originally created on my font editor from the CoCo.
Oh, that's cool. Those fonts do look nice. I kind of wondered where you got them from, actually.
Yeah, and those fonts are now embedded in my design tool. So when I look at my text, it should be in the version you got to play with.
Well, that's
and you can select what text it's going to show on the screen, and you'll go through it, and it goes through the set of fonts that was all designed in the CoCo.
Well, that's excellent.
And I do have also a tool working on Windows. Hope that doesn't give you a shock, John, since you're a Linux person.
You're free to make whatever mistakes you want to make.
Well, the big reason I've looked at doing Linux, I haven't seen a GUI tool yet, and there might be one now in what's called Lazarus. That might be easiest enough to do because I'd rather not have to spend hours just writing event loops to get something done. But Lazarus does run on Linux and Mac and Windows both, and I've been toying with the idea of maybe porting my tools to that so that they'd be multi-platform. Well, Linux is a nice system. It's just I'm so used. I'm sitting there all day, have to work with Windows, so I've got a code for it for the day job and stuff. So that's what it.
Sure.
With all the bad stuff it feeds my family.
and at the end of the day, that's what matters.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Back at you.
I'd be prefer using OS 9, but it didn't work out that way.
OS 9, that's great.
Well, let's not go that far. Nick Morentis will pass out.
Yeah. What do they use for 911 in Australia? We better notify them in advance in case Nick listens to the podcast.
That's what, probably 999?
Yeah, I met Nick. He's cool. He's made it over to
You met him at PenFest, right?
Yeah, PenFest is, He was there for the 25th anniversary. Yeah, I made it to at least 2 of the PenFests, if not 3. It's been too long to remember. I made it to a couple Atlanta Fests, a good portion of the Rainbow Fest, and an awful lot of the CoCo Fest. Okay, it's sometimes life interferes. Moving and out of work, you can't make it, but all possible we make it.
I think you've been to every CoCo Fest that I've been to.
Yeah, so it's a great thing. Known people for years. Chris Hawks and the guys from Glenside have been up there, and Cloud9, and you get this chance. This is unique because we're getting together like a mini CoCo Fest here and getting to talk. But this kind of conversation goes on at CoCo Fest at nights and the days before. And if you like this stuff, guys, make it to the CoCo Fest, okay?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. And speaking of CoCo Fest, I'm looking forward to seeing you there, John.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, there you go. Push the CoCo Fest.
It's you get the insights and stuff. And like I said, I talked on some things I normally don't, publicly talk about because people say, "So when are you going to do this?" Like Neil, you said, "Okay, keep mentioning Bomberman because I worked on some design issues and graphics on that." And it takes a lot of motivation. And that's the thing. You guys like games out there, and I know Neil, you support the guys are right there. And
I try. I mean, because to me, more games the better. I mean, you got to support the homebrew community.
And and if the guys want to give it away free, offer to send them a coffee, or something, if they want it. Or if you meet them at the fest, buy them a coffee or whatever,
Yeah, for sure. And anything to support a little bit's better than nothing.
And what Sockmaster done on Donkey Kong, oh wow, fantastic. And I feel humbled. I'm a good programmer, but some of these guys are just fantastic.
Well, it's amazing the talent out there.
And and some of the things some of these new guys are coming up with. Paul Thayer's got a K-Man game that's looking very interesting.
Right. Yeah, that's in the works.
It'll be interesting to see what he does. And the guy from Australia, other than Nick, doing the ports, McDongle or
Mark.
Mark is his first name. I got that right anyway.
He did Load Runner last year, did he not?
Yeah, I think he's going to put that on a cartridge, and he's got a couple other things he's working on. Yeah, so it's really cool to see this stuff. And to be honestly, the year that Jams 2, I brought it out to CoCo Fest. After that, I was about ready to give up on the CoCo. I mean, you were the only one that bought the game at the fest.
Really?
Okay.
Sorry.
I did a trade or something, but yeah, and it was like, okay, I put tons of work in this thing to make it play right, and people at that festus were not really coming around to the booth, and it's changed last year, okay, and things has changed, but I really thought it was ready to die off, I mean, my point was like, okay, I get one game sold, why?
I mean, that's kind of the overall situation that this podcast has started in response to. There's a lot of people that are interested in having energy in the group or whatever, and sometimes they don't get the response that we feel like they should get. And so that's part of why we do, we do the news topics where we try to mention people when they've announced something or whatever, and we try to celebrate the achievements that people are doing, and it can be tough to sit. I mean, ultimately, you've got to do this stuff for your own satisfaction, but it can be tough to just live on your own satisfaction when you're doing some of this stuff, and you have friends or family that say, what is this about? What's the point of this? Whatever. and sometimes that little extra bit of, well, there's 30 guys on the mailing list that told me this is the greatest thing they've ever seen. Sometimes that's enough to make the difference, right?
Well, you got to have the motivation, okay? And just like the cases I'm selling helps a lot. My wife loves to go to CoCo Fest, but it's like, okay, that's a lot of money out. We could be going someplace else, and I go there and I'm working, and it's kind of a fun work, but still it's different than just hanging out and just having fun alone, And because I put a lot of effort to do that, and I do like the CoCo Fest photo, and I've carried huge printers up to the show, and contributed in all the ways that I can, because I think it's a great thing for people who's been getting together this long. Okay, it's 25 years, my goodness. Who are your friends from 25 years ago? I mean, everybody's got a few, but boy, they dwindle after 25 years.
Yeah, no kidding.
And, you'd separate it, and guys we'll still hang out with are still there, after 25 years. And more than that, okay? Familiar faces and things like that. It's cool.
Yeah, and it's also nice to see a lot of new faces. I mean, I think this podcast is helping getting the word out. Last year we saw it was a few new people there.
Yeah, last year it was a good new turnout, and I was excited about that.
Yeah, me too.
And like I said, I think it's turning around. I think we hit our low, but I think the new hardware has got people looking at it. Oh, I got new hardware. What do I do with the new hardware? Well, I get these games. Well, I played those games. Well, I need something new software and stuff wise. And, some people's going to do it for free. Other people, my goodness, give you an example, Bomb Squad, the first version of that, I wrote that thing in about a month. Good playable game. But it's like, okay, it's Minesweeper. Oh, would anybody buy that or sell that? Do I give it away? Well, they've got other versions out there. It almost didn't see the light of day. And Nick and John and Robert, they did this high res, and I thought, oh, hey, I can throw that in there. I can increase the resolution on that a little bit. I kind of wanted to do that, but the joystick, that was too choppy of a movement. You couldn't make sure you centered on the piece properly. And so I did. I added that in, changed the screen layouts, and then, oh, well, this is looking really nice. Well, let's make this in something really, let's polish this up and look really nice. And I know the listeners out there, you haven't seen it yet, but, it's a cartridge game, so it's not going to be a disc, or demo out there for it. But you make it to the fest, you'll see it, and I'm sure we're going to have somebody's going to do some video on it or something so you can see some look. And my game's not going to appeal to everybody. So far, most of my stuff has been puzzle type games, and not everybody likes that style of game, and I understand that.
But a lot of people do. I mean, if you look at even on smartphones and tablets, puzzle games are number one. So they do have a following.
Yeah, and it was funny. Alan Huffman was one of the fests, and guys were walking around, and somebody was saying, "Oh, they just got that old boring game," and Alan said, "Yeah, he's talking about your Soviet block, and Tetris is one of the blockbusters games ever out there, and this guy's calling it boring."
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a point I've tried to make a couple of times, is that, some people think that, oh, we need to do these games and they need to be over the top, super wonderful, rivaling 16-bit systems or rivaling, Amiga games or, whatever your benchmark is. But, like you say, I mean, you and I have both done Simon clones, and I've got one that my Simon, I call it Follow CoCo. I'm planning to offer cartridges of Follow CoCo, and I think there'll be people who want it because it's a cool game. You can plug it in and sit down and play and amuse yourself, and it's a solid game. And is it beautiful graphics? Well, no, it's 4 squares on the screen, but but it's playable and enjoyable. And I think it's a good use of the CoCo hardware, and it's certainly no uglier than the average Atari 2600 game, and that still has a very strong following amongst retro gamers.
Well, retro gamers are getting big because a lot of these games are forgetting what's fun, and the Android games are a lot going back. In fact, they're getting too dumb. I just downloaded one because I like the Cars movie from Disney, Pixar, okay? And so they had an Android game through Amazon that was like free in a race game. Well, I've got a Cars game on my DS. I download that thing and I'm looking at, this ain't really a game at all.
Yeah. Well, my daughters have been playing this game that apparently it's a bit of a craze, and I forget the name of it. It's a Japanese game that basically you put food out and see if you can get the neighborhood cats to come and eat the food at your house, and then some of them will leave some kind of presents or whatever, and then there's this one cat named Tubbs that comes around and eats all your food, and it's like, is this really a game? I mean, they seem to enjoy it. Anyway, I think for my fun, the CoCo can certainly offer something that's more fun than that to me.
Absolutely, and the other thing is, to me, some of the simplest games are the best. And a good example of that I always, say to people is, if you look at the Atari 2600, and at the time you had the Intellivision out, and the ColecoVision. Well, the Atari was the worst graphics out of all of them, but look at what game console won in the end. I mean, that's got to tell you something.
Well, I can remember a neighbor lady wearing blisters out in her hand playing Pitfall.
Well, I mean, you could even argue that continues. There's a more modern example from maybe the last generation where the Wii was, arguably the least powerful of the modern platforms a few years ago, and yet I think it did, much better, or at least on par with the PlayStation and Xbox offerings.
Exactly.
I'm not sure that is continuing with the Wii U, but that there's probably other reasons behind that.
No, you're right though. With the Wii, that definitely was the case. I mean, that outsold the units versus the other ones.
This is the gameplay versus technology argument, and so we have gameplay on our side, I think, is what it comes down to.
Well, I actually had a chance to. They had the Consumer Electronics Show years ago. Did have one that was in Chicago, and we actually was able to make it to it one year, and actually got invited out to a hotel to one of the game manufacturers and stuff. And I got to go out there and drink soda and chips, and so it was kind of cool. I actually met the Trammells with Atari at the time, and but again, it's the gameplay, and they were looking at all this looks, and I sit in the hotel room with there. It says, well, all these things are. You're up close at it, they look terrible. They don't look like it. You've got it. Yeah, you back far. It kind of looks like it, but they just don't look right. And they were all trying to make this look the best at a distance and photos and everything. And so if you played reasonably close to the thing, like I always did, they didn't look right. And so they've got so much on the looks, and they go by that. And as you said, gameplay is the king. If it doesn't play great, forget it. The great looks is good. When I'm not putting that down, it's great to have all these colors and all this looks. But man, if you don't have gameplay, forget it. And so that's some of the things like in Gems 2, I kind of went all out in that, and I don't think anybody else has done that. You can do a complete undo in the whole game.
I saw that. That's a neat feature.
And so you can go and you can play that through, and I made a mistake, and undo. And that was kind of a question, do I do that? Is it fair to do this? But, it's you. You're competing against yourself. You can do whatever you want.
That's right.
And, I mean, you can back up and replay it and say, hey, can I do this better? Can I do this? And so that's kind of the unique thing in Gems 2 is it has a complete undo-redo system in the game. And so it's one of the few games in the CoCo that did that, okay? And so I do, like John said, you got to write it for yourself. So I pick something I think is kind of neat that I can do and that I think other people will enjoy. And, and if you get to the point where you think, well, no, other people don't like this, okay, why did I do that? You got to have that, they got to feed that ego a little bit. Or you don't have motivation. I mean, when you're debugging code and, it's the thousandth time that this thing hasn't worked right, and you're sure you've done it right, and you've done everything, and you single step through the code and everything, at some point you got to have something back in there that feeds that ego to keep you going on it. If you don't, you're going to throw it in the wastebasket and forget it.
Yeah, you have to have that balance for sure. The other thing I'd like to add in there, and I think is cool, is that you guys are doing cartridges for these games. I mean, as a retro gamer and a game collector myself, I do really like that. I mean, it's nice to have the whole package.
Well, and I mix on the cartridges. Yeah, it's nice to have a cartridge plug in, and it's cool doing it. But it does take a whole lot more expensive to produce those.
It does,
and it really does add up real quick, and it becomes a major project to do that. That's one reason the Bomb Squad's not released right now. Okay.
Right. But I think that draws people in, though. I mean, I think, at least in my opinion, that people will pay more for that and they'll actually want it. I mean, it's one thing, to hand somebody some code, a downloaded digital content versus an actual cartridge, a physical piece of media in your hand. It's nice to have that.
And I understand that. And, but, looking at and like, okay, where do I get the budget to buy 30 card, PC boards, so I can get the price break so I can sell these at a reasonable price to make the profit on it. Anytime you produce something this, you gotta have enough to cover it. If something goes wrong, it gets out there and that chip fries, and you've got to ship them another one or something.
You need that initial investment to get things going.
And that's something the community, if they're wanting this, is going to have to realize. And so far, it sounds like it. But the other thing that they do need to realize, some people are talking like they want it both ways. They want the other. Your investment in time is the same amount of time developing that game, whether it's a ROM cartridge or the other. The intellectual property is just as hard both ways. They're different.
It's true.
And you need to recognize that. And I see these people on the list of wanting this game or wanting that game, and I'm thinking, well, they want these things, and I post things on the list showing, that I have them, and I get no emails from them. They must not want new games very well if they don't support it. And that's not, I'm saying buy from me. This is not sour grapes. You don't like my games, don't buy my games.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But I'm judging if they want this, then you got to support it.
For
and
sure.
The support I've had on these cases is absolutely fantastic. It blows me away. But we need to support software as good as we support hardware. And we've been doing, in the CoCo groups for the past few years, doing a fantastic job supporting the hardware. We need to support the software. And that's me saying, okay, you're doing new software, John, I've been lack, I haven't bought your games. Of course, you were sold out.
Yeah. I've been slack. I haven't produced enough games, at least the actual cartridges.
Right, but we need to do this, okay, and support the software as much as we're supporting the hardware, because that's what runs it, okay.
Well, I agree. What good's the hardware without software to run on it?
Right.
Well, I do think the cartridge aspect kind of comes in there. I mean, people like to have something they can hold in their hands when they fork their money over. And so the cartridge gives them something. It really is software they've bought, but they feel like they've bought a piece of hardware. I think that helps. And maybe if we can establish a nice cartridge software market, maybe that helps to reinvigorate some of the other software options. I guess it was Neil I was joking with about maybe we can start spinning off cassettes and selling cassettes again or whatever. It's a little bit of a joke. I'm not sure anybody really wants to buy cassettes. Maybe they do. But it's reasonable. Neil, did a super awesome job reproducing Plateau of the Past, which is a diskette-based game. It is a super nice pack. Well, as nice as the package ever was, I mean, it's software in a baggie, which is kind of the way things were done in the past. But he did a super good job on that. There's no reason we couldn't have new software on diskettes that was equally well done. And I mean, now we even know how to get boxes made, and we can put them in boxes instead of baggies.
That's true.
Well, and see, the other thing is, John Ken did this surprise and did that, but I actually invested in a computer cutter. It's like a plotter, but you put a pin in a cutter, They use it for crafts and stuff. And I was going to actually produce my own box and cut it out myself. And Tim shows this, and I'm thinking, okay, at least the first ones, I've got to go with 10 boxes, okay? People are going to connect with that first. Besides, it'll take, save me a couple weeks of work getting all this figured out. So, a lot of things are coming together right now, It just, you hear perfect storms to be bad. It's coming that way, maybe the CoCo the other way, I think if all goes well this fest, we're going to have a fantastic fest. And if you're not there, you're going to miss a bunch.
Yeah, I think so too. I really have a good feeling about it.
Yeah, and it's the 25th anniversary. Can't forget that.
Yeah.
Now you make me feel old. I was at the first one.
I was listening to another podcast. I think it was the new TRS-80 podcast that's out there. And they said something to the effect of, they had a line in there that was, well, our these TRS-80s we're covering, the Model 1 and 3 or whatever, we may not have as much energy in our community as, say, the color computer does, but, and la-da-da. I just thought that was pretty cool. Hey, we're the mark of excellence for some other communities out there now.
That is cool.
We're doing pretty well. Come out to CoCo Fest and see how well we're doing.
Well, and I really think that for the amount of people we've had, we've always done great. You know, the Atari and the Commodore and stuff did great because they just had so many more people.
Well, the user base was a lot bigger.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the stuff we came up with, you know, on the color computers on Mac, CoCo Max, okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's Tim Jennison did such a job, boy. The guys who, Eric and the two guys who did Color Max, Eric Graveluck and I'm trying to remember the other guy's name, but they did a fantastic job on that. But they were working on a graphic program, and I actually was too. When CoCo Max came out, I can remember being in the mall, walking through the mall, and seeing on the cover either Rainbow Magazine or Color Computer Magazine, CoCo Max, looking at it, what it does, and just walking fuming mad through the mall because this guy's just thrown away all the work I did. Okay? Just blew it away, okay? There's no way I could compete with that at the time, okay? It's just like, you know, he did a fantastic job. Of course, I was one of the first buyers of the thing, okay?
You know, but I always said that. I remember, you know, back in the day, my friends were always amazed with the color computer. You know, I had one, and they all had PCs, and you know, between Color Max, CoCo Max, and Max 10, I mean, that was some amazing GUI desktop publishing, and you could shoot that right off to your printer.
Yeah.
You know, with the machine, the 512K, I thought that was pretty amazing. I mean, considering there's no hard drive, it's just running all off floppies.
Yeah, and so it's really kind of, you know, a cool machine, and it's surprising the number of people I run into that had color computers and got started with it. You know, in places I work, you know, people say, oh, I had one of those. Here in Lansing, they had a big club, and so one of the guys in the amateur radio club, he was a CoCo guy, okay? And of course, he knew Malcolm, who was a longtime CoCo Fest goer, and because they were in the same CoCo club when it was running.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I run into him, you know, all over the place. And it really has really a change, and it's a sweet processor in there, the 6009 and stuff. You know, I know you can edit this where we're going on, but I think it's a lot of good stuff. This is like our mini CoCo Fest, folks. You know, this is the kind of conversations, really. It goes on at, you know, at the CoCo Fest, either during the fest or at night or sitting at the table eating or something like that. And, you know, the kind of brainstorming we talk about, you know, things we'd like to do and sneak peeks of games and stuff. And
oh, yeah, it's just an amazing bunch of people. It's always a good time there.
You know, and it's like this is happening all at once, you know. It's Facebook without the computer getting in the way.
Oh, Lord. Neil, put on your robes and sing in the background while we talk some more.
And you know, the CoCo Fest has been some really cool things that you guys have missed out on, okay? You know, and did you know there was a CoCo Fest? They actually had a wake for a CoCo computer?
No.
No. Of course, I know that because I'm the culprit behind it. My CoCo 3 that I did my original development on went to Fest and decided to die at the show, so I had to pick up another one. Fortunately, they were inexpensive enough at the time. I bought another one so I could demo stuff. My planned seminar was going to be on, you know, what the CoCo's done in the past and where it's going to in the future. Well, now I have a dead CoCo in my hands. Let's spin this a little differently. Let's use the dead CoCo as the future, talk about what it's done in the past and where things are going. And so we had I gave the eulogy through my CoCo 3, and even Brother Jeremy came in and said a few words. So I've had the only CoCo that died that had a eulogy and a priest that was actually spoke at the...
Do you remember what year that was at?
No, I don't remember what year that was.
I'd just be curious.
And I don't know if that was the year. I knew Carl from Texas taped a lot of stuff, but I don't know if he taped that year. Because I know he taped a lot of my seminars on video that I gave. But I don't recall if he was actually taping that year or not. So maybe Carl, if you're listening, did you tape that one?
Carl Sefchick.
Yeah. And did you tape that year?
If you would like to know the year.
Yeah. But Alan Huffman and I, we shared the booth together the first year at the CoCo Fest. He edges me on some of the stuff I do. He was actually one who said, you need to make a case for the CoCo SDC. And I'm thinking, well, why? There's a case being made. Well, I'd like to have one enclosed, so I did. And it seems about the time I'm getting close to getting the design worked out, Tim decides to stop making his cases. And so I just announced a little bit early, and that started that. So it's been interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on. We had the guy, for a while, OSK was really doing big with the MM1s and the other machines. And I did software development for it.
That's an OSK, that's a OS9 for 58,000.
Right.
Yeah.
We actually have a guy who came from Europe, and he had, I think it was M Windows, he did a port to the MM1, and he came to my hotel room after the show, and we actually installed it on my MM1. We played around with it a little bit till late at night, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had to sack and get back up. So we did a lot of cool things, different fests and stuff. One year they had a fire alarm went off in the hotel we were staying in. Had to get out in the middle of the night and get out there.
Well, that's always interesting.
Yeah, and one of the guys who was with us, one of the friends that came with us, he woke up in the morning and asked him what was that? I thought I was dreaming. But there's a lot of stuff, and you get a lot meet guys you've talked to online, people that will be friends with you for years.
Yeah, a lot of loyal people, really nice people there. Great conversations. You always learn something new.
Yeah, a lot of good ideas floating around. Stuff that you see come out later. Oh, that's new. Well, it is if you wasn't at the CoCo Fest, but we already talked about it there. So we're promoting CoCo Fest. Yay, rah, CoCo Fest.
Yeah, exactly.
I think on that note, we'll tell everybody to join us at CoCo Fest this year.
And and you get to see the seminars and some of the stuff. Get to see laser shows done with a CoCo. There's a lot of things. Get to hear the designers of the 6809 talk about what went on in the design of the computer chip. Okay, really geek out.
Yeah, it's a great way to meet a lot of the developers, either for software, hardware. A lot of them show up.
Oh yeah, it just and you meet guys. I'm not a dummy, okay, but I go up there and I meet guys and I think, oh man, these guys are smart. Mark Millette, okay, with the stuff he's done with the hardware, okay.
Hey, how do you think I feel? I don't even program.
James Jones. There's a guy who'll make you feel dumb. Not intentionally, but just being around him, you can tell that's a smart dude.
Oh yeah, he was like did a lot of work on the C compiler from Microware.
Yeah.
Okay, this guy's got a fountain of knowledge. He's probably forgotten more than a lot of us know. And I would say you forgot a lot, Jay, but I'm just saying. Just saying you're a smart cookie. Yeah, the other group that is Delco Electronics, and now Delphi, actually had a corporate sponsored color computer club, and Delco was one of the biggest users of Motorola products back in the day. And how I actually got connected to the group, I knew they were there. We were 30 or 40 miles from where we lived was Kokomo, Indiana, which is the Delco headquarters at the time, now Delphi. And so I kept hearing about this CoCo group and never had any contacts there. So at the Rainbow Fest, and we went out to eat, and was walking into the Burger King, and I walked by this GM product, and I see the speedometer system sitting on the dashboard. It says, these got to be the guys from Delco. And so I spotted who had getting in and out of that and introduced myself. And sure enough, the company loaned them the car as long as they drive in the test vehicle. They were testing the system, so they got to drive to the CoCo Fest for free. The car from CoCo Electronics, so they did a lot. They did a lot of stuff hardware wise and stuff with the CoCo there.
That's cool.
And the Buick Riviera basically had equivalent to MC10 in one of the earlier console systems. It had a 6800 series CPU and a 6847 and the CRT, and they used it to control the entertainment system and the heating and stuff. Now I don't know what year that was, but it was one of the first, smart consoles in a car, and that was all based on Motorola chips.
No, that's amazing, and people complain there's computers in cars now. There's computers back then.
Oh yeah, and have I rambled on long enough? Any questions?
I think that's good. Definitely would like to thank you for your time for doing this interview, sharing this information with us.
Well, I hope we can get into something that sounds really cool and coherent to everybody. And to everybody out there that has supported anybody in the color computer community, thank you. This isn't all, my statements is not all about me, because, I'm only one or the other, and if I'm filling in, I'm figuring, other people are seeing the same thing. And if we're going to be a healthy community, we need to support each other. I mean, we're small enough for family, guys like Neil and John, I treat everybody like family, Alan Huffman, hey, I pick on him every chance we get. The fake booth that he set up in Atlanta to pull a joke on a guy, a thrice on tomb, a guy who was keep mentioning that, and that's actually a vacuum tube used in transmitters, high power ones, and Alan found one. And it set up a booth of a fake manual with references to the tube, how it's going to be used to the color computer. And the guy seen that, he's going about half crazy trying to figure out who had the booth. It was so funny.
Well, I definitely missed out on that.
Yeah, that was Atlanta Fest. And Atlanta Fest was cool because some of the guys who worked at chemists at Coca-Cola were color computer users. Alan was a big Jolt drinker, and so they had to brew him up a special batch of Coke, a la Jolt. And they were allowed to do that as long as it was in a plain glass bottle and didn't say Coca-Cola. Because they could, take it out and let people taste it and get ideas, but you couldn't say Coca-Cola on it. Oh, man, you could get a buzz from the caffeine in a cane sugar and almost unhealthy dose of caffeine.
Well, yeah, was it John Mark Mobley that's been offering people the super strong coffee at the last couple of fests?
I don't know. I'm not a coffee drinker, so I didn't really
that was him.
I want to get in on that this year. Try some of that coffee.
Yeah, so it's been a lot of stuff going on there. I mean, it's different every year, but a lot of cool stuff, and the new hardware stuff showing up. The new multi-pack. I'm hoping to see that there. If I can get him to get me a copy before he releases it, let me see if I can make a case for it. But I've got to get it, and it might be too big for my machine to print it for it. But there's a lot of things going on, people. Show up. This is the event of the year for the CoCo community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Get out there, come and join us, be part of the family, and show us what you're doing, look at what we've done. Let's talk about it, chat about it, celebrate it, and just get together and have some fun, make some friends. I mean, it's like I keep saying, there's only so many of us out there with this kind of crazy, and there's one place where we all congregate. So if you're the same kind of crazy as the rest of us, you ought to come and meet us.
And it's just like Brett Gordon. I've had my booth next to his a couple years, and that guy is, he's does some really cool stuff, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, he's smart.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I keep saying that, but,
Brett was one of the winners in Retro Challenge here back in January.
Yeah.
His artillery game.
And
Nuclear war, I think he called it.
And there's just so much we can still do with the CoCo to have fun and the share and make other people's eyes spin and like, oh, you doing that? Back to my gems too. I kind of have, it was almost a compliment. Guys had walked by and my CoCo was a storage, so I had to show it on the emulator on a PC, and the guys thought it was a PC game. Okay, and they kind of ignored it because they thought it was a PC game. And so, and I'm probably going to get, maybe some of the same results, with Bomb Squad. But there's stuff out there. There's more stuff coming, games. John's got games that's going to be there. I've got some stuff, and nobody's looking to get rich, okay? Yeah, I sell my games, but I put a lot into it, and this stuff helps me to invest in other things to produce new things, And
Keeps the hobby going.
Well, it keeps it going, okay? I get to spend on, well, I made that from there, okay, it's all right, you spend that, but I want to dress, okay.
Well, I mean, if I want to do it just for me, I can make, this is actually kind of what I said about the carts I was making by hand before, is, well, I'll make some, I'll make a few, and if nobody wants them, I'll just give them to my friends, and that'll be it. But, to give it to, and of course we're all friends, but you know what I'm saying.
Right,
But, if people want it beyond the circle of people I actually know, well, it's got to at least break even, make a few bucks for me. and if I make it a few bucks when spending the time and we get to go to CoCo Fest, I said, oh yeah, maybe I better let you spend some time on this, Yep.
If I'm going up there and giving it away, my wife says, okay, let's go do something. You're not doing.
Well, exactly. I mean, like I said,
I don't blame her.
There's room for some of that, but there's only so much room in most people's day. If there's nothing, especially if you're all just giving. I mean, I could give away cartridges to a few people, and probably would if that's what it came down to. But I'm not going to give away 100 or 40 or whatever. Give away 5.
If there was somebody that I knew couldn't afford what I'm asking, and I try to keep my price reasonable, my disc games will give it to. In fact, James Jones lost his game he bought from me one year, and so when that fest, I asked him, well, how you like the game? He said, well, I think I forgot it in O'Hare Airport. Okay, I reached down and I give him another copy.
Right.
It's just what you do. I mean, that's the way you treat people, and that's the way we do it to fest,
Right.
You come there and you make yourself friendly, we'll be friendly back. I tell everybody I treat everybody like family whether they like it or not.
That's funny.
And I know the word has a different meaning in the dictionary in the Midwest anyway. And I say this, what makes it warning is I come from a very ornery family. And a Hoosier definition of that is kind of like mischievous. It's like guys pick on each other. In Indiana, that's our definition of ornery.
Definitely.
But I know some parts of Wisconsin, and I know in some areas of Michigan even, they don't have the same definition, non-dictionary definition we did in Indiana. So, but hey, come up, meet your new friends you didn't know you had.
Cool. Well, I think that probably wraps it up.
And thank you, John and Neil, and for doing the podcast and now promoting this. And
well, thank you, Jim, for being part of it.
Sharing some of those past memories at CoCo Fest and Atlanta Fest and Penn Fest, and great to hear that.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of other people have stories, and I know the time they went down to Chicago and there was a car wreck, big mess down there. But it's people flying in from all kinds of places and stuff, and you never know who you will see, and get surprised about things, and you might even get your own 15 seconds of fame. And thank you guys for the opportunity to chaw on your ear a little bit and check out this stuff, the CoCo. I think you guys will see a bunch of cool things coming there. And this is just 4 of the group that's there. You got about 60 of us there.
Maybe more. We'll see.
Well, that was last year, okay? Hopefully a lot more this year.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's been, in the past it's been a lot more, okay, than that.
Hopefully they'll blow the doors off the place this year.
Well, yeah, I hope it's so packed they have to look at getting a bigger place.
Get ready, player one.
Welcome back to the Games Corner. On this episode, I will be reviewing the game called Time Bandit. This was another one of my favorite CoCo 1 and 2 games from back in the day, and it still is now. I play this game from time to time, and I always enjoy it. It was programmed back in 1983 by Bill Dunleavy and Harry Lafnier. Not sure if I'm pronouncing these names right. And it was published by Computer Shack Mitchtron. I believe Mitchtron took over after Computer Shack. I'm not 100% sure on this. It requires a CoCo with 32K of memory. It will work on all Color Computer series, including the Color Computer 3. Now on to the game. Time Bandit is an arcade-style game. You are a bandit that travels from a home-base central location called the Time Gates. This central location is where you start out and always come back to. There are 3 different worlds to visit: space, fantasy, and western. In each of these worlds, there are 7 different portals. The object for this game is to travel through the gates and collect treasure, kill monsters, and find your keys and locks to travel back to the central location. Each time you visit a gate that you have been to before, the map changes slightly. If you solve a gate 16 times, you are given a secret message for it, and the gate is then shut down on the central location time gate screen. I have never come close to finishing this game. I've only got a few different messages, so unfortunately I can't tell you what the ending is like. This game is just so much fun. There's always so much action going on and things to do. It really never gets boring. It's also extremely impressive for a game that only requires 32K of memory. It has over 320 screens worth of sideways scrolling and sound effects all at the same time. On a side note, later on in 1985, this game was released on the Amiga and Atari ST 16-bit computers. It was also later on released on the PC-DOS platform. I have recently just acquired and played the Atari ST and PC-DOS versions of this game. And to be honest, I prefer the CoCo version. And no, I'm not just saying that or being biased either. The other versions play more like the game Gauntlet. Not that I have anything against Gauntlet, it's just a different feel from the original Time Bandit game that I know of on the CoCo. I also like to mention I think Time Bandit suits and looks great on the CoCo 1 and 2 color set. The programmers did a fantastic job making it look just right, even when traveling into the different worlds. Well, there you have it, another awesome game you can check out for your CoCo on a rainy night, or who's kidding who, even on a gorgeous summer night. We are gamers after all. You can find this game on the Color Computer Archives website. Until next month, game on and CoCo forever. Well, it's that time again. We have reached the end of episode 10, and you know what that means, don't you? Just one more episode before CoCo Fest. That's right, just one more episode, and then we are en route to the greatest event ever. We hope to see all of you there. It's still not too late to book. There are lots of hotel rooms left to be had for the special CoCo Fest discount rate. I think we ran just slightly over our regular time schedule on this episode. Hard not to with all these great projects, interviews, and tech segments. So much goodness happening in the CoCo community right now. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please keep your feedback coming in, whether it be audio or text, whatever you prefer. I would like to thank my host John Linville for providing the Orchestra 90 tech segment. I have to admit, I was one of the people who thought there was some magical hardware in that pack. We also would like to thank all of you for listening. Again, you are the most important part of the show. If we didn't have you tuning in, there'd be no point in making this podcast. Stay tuned for next month's show, and until then, happy CoCoing.